Lord of Mysteries, The Arrival of the New Black Emperor by Huo Yang. Chapter 126 to 150. We conducted an initial investigation into Kate. Dai Li recalled the information she could tell Hobert. We confirmed that he had indeed just consumed the secret supplicant potion. The person who gave him the potion formula seems to be contacting him soon, so we are monitoring Kate around the clock to catch more dangerous individuals. Hobert nodded. I hope you can announce the general results to me after the matter is concluded. Dai Li hummed, we will, as long as you need us to. Also, I have other clues about the secret supplicant here, Hobert said. At that time, I wasn't your informant. Hobert briefly recounted the process of tracking Haman and Zachary, including the information he obtained from Darkholme. A bishop of the Aurora Order named Hillman was hidden among the farmers in Backland. Dai Li listened very carefully. This information is very useful to us, even more valuable than the information you provided before. We will investigate it. Hobert took a sip of wine and asked, what is the approximate value of this information? If all of it is true, it's worth roughly 1/5 of a briber extraordinary characteristic. Hobert nodded. It was worth about 250 to 60 pounds, and the price Dai Li offered was fair. He whispered, the second thing is, I hope to get extraordinary medicine that nourishes spirituality. Dai Li was startled at first but then understood. I didn't feel any damage to your spiritual body, and I thought you had found a way to erase the damage caused by 2 to 365. That black glove was named 2 to 365 by the Night Watchers. I did deal with the damage to my spiritual body, Hobert said. But I always feel that my spirituality is weaker than before, so I want to nourish my own spirituality. No problem, Dai Li said. The previous report on the secret supplicant Kate is enough for you to exchange for medicine that nourishes spirituality. I want 3 servings. Also no problem. Dai Li did not ask who the other 2 servings were for. I will send someone to your law firm tomorrow morning. After chatting with Dai Li for a few more sentences, Hobert quickly said goodbye. Since he knew Kate could appear in court normally tomorrow, he had to make all preparations for the lawsuit. By the time he returned to the law firm, it was already past 4 in the afternoon, and Hobert was mentally prepared to work overtime. But he quickly found that this case was indeed quite simple. He even felt that the plaintiff's lawyer should be having a headache now, not himself. Around 5 o'clock, Hobert had completed all the preparatory work. He silently praised his efficiency and then considered what to eat later. Outside Crowley City in the South Continent, a dozen carriages were undergoing final adjustments. They were going to travel at night tonight. This was the Bach family's convoy. After that demigod battle, the negotiations became much easier. Ultimately, the Fursak Empire and the Bach family reached an agreement. The Bach family would send 1 Sequence 5, 3 Sequence 6s, and several Sequence 7s and Sequence 8s to be permanently stationed in Crowley City. These Beyonders would assist the Fursak Empire and General Anthony in dealing with Beyander attacks from other countries, colonies, pirates, and other forces, as well as resolving local cases involving extraordinary factors. Due to the Bach family's hostile relationship with the Rose School, this deployment was a secret one, to avoid retaliation from the Rose School. The benefits the Bach family received were 2 copper mines and a large forest suitable for logging. In the convoy, Elliot saw that Calvin finally had some free time. He stepped forward and invited Calvin to a corner away from the crowd. Uncle Calvin, I'll take a few minutes of your time. I know what you're going to ask, Calvin said. You didn't tell anyone else the spirit channeling results, did you? No, Elliot said. Uncle Calvin, that's true, isn't it? He whispered, the family curse has nothing to do with the Rose School. Calvin nodded, yes, that's true. Elliot asked somewhat angrily, then why do we keep fighting the Rose School? Every year, members of the Bach family died at the hands of the Rose School. Calvin glanced at Elliot. His feelings when facing Elliot now were very complex. This was originally a junior in the family, but now, because of his special identity, he had to communicate with him carefully. I think you've already guessed the answer, Calvin said. Only by finding a target for the family members to vent their frustrations can our family have the strength to continue. Otherwise, we will inevitably end up like Rex's family, with only him left. Even if his personal strength is strong, once he fails, all previous efforts will be in vain. Elliot's shoulders slumped. What exactly should I do to end the family's curse? You should be closer to the answer than we are, Calvin said meaningfully. We seem to have more hope now than ever before. Elliot took a deep breath. I understand. On Thursday morning, Hobert arrived at the Backland courthouse at 8 o'clock. There were only a few people in the audience for this case. Among them was Furs, who was there to gather material. After a brief communication with Bill, Hobert quietly waited for the trial to begin. Around 8:20, Kate, who looked somewhat dazed, appeared in the plaintiff's seat. The confident, even somewhat arrogant, demeanor he had before was gone, as if he hadn't slept well for several days. No matter what person or object he saw, or if someone spoke to him, he would pause before reacting. Hobert thought to himself, he might really not have slept well for several days. Having just consumed the secret supplicant potion, it's difficult to control the overflowing spirituality. Late at night, after everyone is asleep, Kate must feel that his home is livelier than during the day. At exactly 8:30, the trial officially began. The plaintiff's lawyer first stated that Bill had driven a boat while intoxicated and had a serious accident. According to the relevant penalties for drunk driving, Bill would face at least 3 years in prison and compensation of £100 to the plaintiff, Mr. Kate. Next, it was the defense lawyer's turn to speak. Hobert smiled and said, yes, Mr. Bill admits he drove under the influence, but not drunk driving, though that's not important. I brought a copy of the Ruined Kingdom criminal law. Let's take a look at the regulations on drunk driving. He spoke while flipping open the criminal law. Relevant regulations are on page 226. If a carriage or steam car driver has an accident after drinking, the driver shall bear all losses in the accident. If the driver is drunk, it shall be elevated to a criminal case, and the driver shall bear criminal responsibility. Please note the previous description, carriage or steam car driver. Does this regulation mention small steamship drivers? Even if it's according to the precedent where cases and facts not explicitly stipulated by regulations can be extended or interpreted with corresponding meaning, a small steamship cannot be interpreted as a carriage or a steam car. One runs on the road, and one runs in the water. The meanings of the two are vastly different. Therefore, I believe that the plaintiff's claim is not valid. My client, Bill, at most disturbed public order, or disturbed traffic order, and did not cause serious consequences. He only needs to be fined less than £1. Hobert's words made the plaintiff's lawyer's face grow increasingly grim. When he took on this case, he realized that the client, Kate, knew nothing about the law. Kate kept insisting on suing Bill for drunk driving, but there were loopholes in the relevant regulations, making it difficult to convict Bill. The plaintiff's lawyer could only pray that the defendant's lawyer hadn't discovered this point, but it was clear his prayers had failed. The defendant's lawyer, Hobert, had indeed discovered this loophole, which was why he decided to take on the case. The plaintiff's lawyer quickly changed his strategy, preparing to demand more compensation. As a result, most of the bills Kate had previously inflated were exposed by Hobert, and the final compensation was cut from £100 to £30. The case was not complicated, so the judge quickly announced the verdict. The plaintiff's demands were not valid. Bill was fined £1, and ordered to compensate the plaintiff £30 for losses. Even after the court adjourned, Kate still looked dazed, as if everything that had happened in the courtroom had nothing to do with him. Bill was released on the spot, and he and his family repeatedly thanked Hobert, paying him £10 commission on the spot. After seeing off Bill and his family, Hobert called Furs to return to the law firm together. In the carriage, Hobert asked, "How's the material collection coming along?" "It's almost done," Furs said. "I even sat in on other lawyers' defenses. To be honest, none of them were as brilliant as yours. I'm even planning to make them the villains." Hobert smiled and said, "When you design the characters, remember to make me handsome." Furs said helplessly, I'm writing a novel, not your biography. Then just thank Mr. Hobert for providing the material on the title page. Hobert smiled. It's a mutual promotion. That's acceptable. Because Hobert had indeed provided her with a lot of material. Then Furs asked, is there something you need me for at the law firm? Yesterday, I found the potion for nourishing spirituality, and they promised to deliver it today, Hobert said. It's a good time to take your and Hugh's share. Furs was stunned, then smiled and said, Hobert, sometimes I wonder if you're trying to pursue me or Hugh. Hobert smiled and said, you're right, I want to pursue both of you. One of you is a literary girl, and the other is a lowly style girl, both very unique. Forget it, Furs shook her head. Your eyes have already betrayed you, you don't have such intentions. I just discovered a fact very early on, Hobert said seriously. This world is too big. If only I become strong, I will always fight alone, and such a life would be very tiring. If my friends and I all become strong, we might even have the power to change the world. Furs pondered the sentence carefully. Don't think about refusing or feeling embarrassed about such small help, Hobert said. This is just normal human interaction. When it truly involved benefits, such as selling them extraordinary characteristic, Hobert would at most give them a discount. Through this conversation, Furs felt that her relationship with Hobert had grown much closer. Before, she always thought of Hobert as Hugh's friend, but now she felt that Hobert was also her, Furs's, friend. Back at the law firm, the potion Miss Daly promised had indeed been delivered. Furs took the potion, promised to treat Hobert to dinner, and then prepared to leave. Hobert suddenly said meaningfully, if you help Hugh investigate Keelingers during this time, you must always be vigilant. He's a ruthless pirate. Furs agreed and waved goodbye. Hobert first drank the potion sent by Miss Daly, and after a while, he felt his spirituality become full, returning to its optimal state. As expected of a church that has existed for thousands of years, they even have such obscure prescriptions. He sat back down in his seat, leisurely opened a folder, and didn't read a single word for more than 10 minutes. Yes, he started slacking off again. After all, there was nothing urgent these past couple of days. It wasn't until the afternoon that he found slacking off rather boring, so he began to consider Bob's case. Next time court convenes, Arnold will definitely find a better lawyer, and it will certainly be more difficult than this time. Hobert suddenly thought that he could find a few witnesses to describe the environment in Bob's workshop, solidifying Arnold's inaction. So Hobert wrote to Bob and David, asking them to find a few former co-workers who had worked in Arnold's factory. When idle, time always flies by. In a blink of an eye, it was Saturday, and Hobert began to prepare for his business trip. He didn't need to pack too much luggage, mainly, he was going home to pick up Christine's handwritten letter. So on Saturday evening, Hobert simply went home for dinner and picked up Christine's letter. Since he hadn't yet received the official notice for the next court session of Bob's case, Hobert didn't set off on Sunday, but instead planned to wait until next Monday. This weekend, Hobert didn't plan to attend the Mercenary Club's gathering, so he slept in at home, had lunch with Donna and the others, and then set off back to Blanca Street. When he left home, Donna even made a pact with Hobert to visit his rented apartment after he returned from his business trip. The reason for returning to the rented apartment was that Hobert needed to separate the astrologer's extraordinary characteristic. The barbarian's extraordinary characteristic that was separated earlier had reconverged, turning into one lawyer's extraordinary characteristic and one barbarian's extraordinary characteristic. Since the experiment was successful, he planned to successively separate the astrologer's, sheriff's, and briber's extraordinary characteristic he held. The first two would be sold to Furs and Hugh, and the latter he would use himself in the future. After almost exhausting his spirituality, Hobert finally shattered the astrologer's extraordinary characteristic. In the future, he would obtain one astrologer's, one magician's, and one apprentice's extraordinary characteristic. He found that with his current power, he could at most shatter a sequence 7 extraordinary characteristic, higher sequences seemed impossible. Immediately after, he seemed to discover a business opportunity, He could acquire leftover Sequence 8 extraordinary characteristic, and then by reselling them, they would become one Sequence 8 and one Sequence 9 extraordinary characteristic. The only drawback was that shattering an extraordinary characteristic consumed too much spirituality, making mass production impossible. Time came to Monday, and as soon as Hobert started work, he received 2 letters and an official document. The official document contained the new court date for Bob's case, which was more than 20 days away, giving him plenty of time. The 2 letters were from Bob and David, respectively. They listed several names, but stated that they no longer knew the current addresses or workplaces of these co-workers, and were even unsure if they were still alive. Hobert pondered for a moment, first writing back to Bob to inform him of the new court date. Then he put on his trench coat, checked his revolver, and took a taxi carriage to find Darkholme, the gang leader in the East District. When it came to finding people, gang leaders were more efficient than the police. Getting out of the carriage, Hobert found that Darkholme's front door was open. Upon entering, Hobert surprisingly saw Hugh vomiting, Furs standing guard nearby, and Darkholme looking as if he had been processed by a butcher. Hobert stood frozen at the doorway. Holy crap. It can't be such a coincidence. Immediately after, he felt an undisguised malice sweep over him. Hobert was particularly impressed by this scene. Zio entrusted the task of finding Keelingers to a gang leader, but when she and Furs came to collect the investigation results, the gang leader was already arranged all over the room. However, Hobert never expected that the tragically dead gang leader was Darkholme. After all, he was someone who was killed off as soon as he appeared, who would remember his name. Standing at the doorway, Hobert hadn't yet vomited from the scene inside when he felt a strong sense of malice. Furs, with her higher spirit, also felt the malice. She looked at her bracelet, then at Hobert and Zio, putting her in a dilemma. By using one stone from her bracelet, she could perform a travel and quickly escape from here. But she could only take one person. If it were before, she would have undoubtedly taken Zio and left. However, after their conversation on Thursday, she had already considered Hobert a friend, and if she abandoned Hobert, her conscience would certainly be uneasy. Furs only hesitated for a second or two, but these were crucial seconds. Hobert saw Furs's expression and roughly understood what was going on. He quickly stepped forward and plunged his cane into the ground. Order. The order wood rapidly grew taller and thicker, forming a canopy against the ceiling. The canopy spread outwards, breaking through the window glass and extending outside the windows. While the order wood was still growing, Hobert, as its wielder, felt an extraordinary attack coming. Hobert immediately distorted the attack's target, and the extraordinary attack went towards a chair. Crack! The chair shattered as if exploding, scattering into pieces on the floor. Hobert quickly pulled Zio and Furs to hide behind the tree trunk. Just as they hid, someone appeared at Darkholme's door. He was about 30 years old, with a broad chin and dark green eyes. It was Hurricane General Keelingers. Bang, bang. Hobert, from behind the tree trunk, fired 2 shots and, using the order under the order wood, made the gunshots louder than usual. Keelinger's face was full of amusement. He was about to rush over and launch a new attack when he suddenly heard Hobert shout, "Do you see this big tree? Under the tree, you can't kill me. All order will become beneficial to me." These words were half-truths. Hobert was bluffing. However, the rapid growth of the large tree and the sudden loss of control of the extraordinary attack just now did indeed make Keelingers somewhat cautious. Keelingers did not rush forward recklessly, but his position completely blocked his view of Hobert and the other 2. So, with a wave of his hand, a strong gust of wind swept up the heart, liver, spleen, lungs, kidneys, and other organs placed on the table, blowing them towards the 3 people hiding behind the tree trunk. When Zio saw the head with a pained expression flying towards her, she instinctively gripped Hobert's arm tightly. Furs, who had once been a doctor, was not much better off. She raised her foot to dodge but was pulled back by Hobert. Keelingers did this precisely to force them out of the order wood's protection. At this moment, Hobert suppressed the urge to vomit and distorted the direction in which Darkholme was flying. Splat. Bones, internal organs, and other matter fell to both sides of the tree trunk. Hobert shouted again, "You must be the one Arnold sent to kill me, right? Haha, your plan will fail. The gunshots just now will quickly attract the attention of official Beyonders." Madness. Keelingers remained unmoved and launched a new offensive. Zio and Furs trembled all over, and the rationality in their eyes gradually disappeared. It seemed they were about to rush out and fight Keelingers to the death. Hobert quickly hugged the two of them tightly and used hypnosis to help them regain their rationality. "I am an unofficial member of the Punisher's team. I will not be harmed in any way, but you will definitely be captured and used as experimental subjects." Keelingers stopped his forward steps, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. Under this big tree, extraordinary attacks would have their targets distorted, direct attacks would have their directions distorted, and even attacks from the spiritual world were useless. He hesitated almost not at all and immediately turned and left. It wasn't that he was scared, nor was he intimidated by Hobert's words, but rather he felt the flow of the power of order under the canopy and knew that he wouldn't be able to resolve the battle quickly. The speed of his decision-making and the decisiveness of his actions made even Hobert exclaim, "This is the kind of reaction only someone who has crawled out of a pile of dead bodies would have." And the reason Keelingers chose to act before was because he judged that he could quickly deal with Hobert and the other two, without even alarming the surrounding people, in which case he could still have some fun with the two women. Hobert breathed a slight sigh of relief. If he had made even the slightest mistake in his response just now, such as directly calling out Keelinger's name instead of pretending to mistake him for someone else, Keelingers would not have left so readily. "Hobert, can you let go of me now?" Furs asked, blushing slightly. Only then did Hobert realize that in the emergency, he hadn't thought much and had hugged both of them with his arms crossed. He released his arms and smiled. "Luckily I held you two back, otherwise you would have left the protection of the tree trunk." He recalled the feeling just now. To be honest, Furs had some assets. As for Zio, she might not have fully developed yet. Ha 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 ha. Zio and Furs suddenly burst into laughter together, their eyes filled with surprise, but it didn't stop them from laughing until tears streamed down their faces. The negative effect of the psychological spoon arrived as expected, only this time the negative effect appeared on the people it had attacked. Hobert's heart suddenly stirred, and he used his extraordinary ability to distort Zio and Furs's laughter. The effect was immediate. The two only had smiles on their faces but no longer laughed out loud. He sighed again. The psychological spoon was completely prepared for lawyers. The distortion of sequence 8 could counteract most of the negative effects, and if it reached the distortion of sequence 7, it should be able to completely counteract the negative effects. Zio wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes, a somewhat unnatural smile on her face. Just now. It was Keelinger's spiritual attack that caused your emotions to become chaos, Hobert casually offered an excuse. Seeing that there were already many onlookers outside, he bent down, picked up the head of his cane, and said, "Let's go to the Black Knight Goddess Church." As long as there were people outside, he dared to go out. He knew Keelingers would absolutely not expose himself at this time. Passing through the crowd of onlookers, he found a nearby taxi carriage. Hobert handed the coachman a 5-Soul banknote. "Go to the nearest Black Knight Goddess Church from here. Take a route with many people, the more people on the way, the better." The coachman took the money and thanked him. Although the guest's request was a bit strange, as long as there was money, he was willing to follow the guest's arrangement. Entering the Black Knight Goddess Church meant they were completely safe. Hobert told Zio and Furs to wait in their seats, then entered the confessional and said to the priest inside, "I am Hobert, an unregistered member of the Night Watcher squad. This is my identification. I just encountered Keelingers, yes, Hurricane General." Hobert briefly recounted his recent experience, and the priest asked him to wait in the church. About half an hour later, Captain Thomas personally led a team over. Without even exchanging pleasantries, he said, tell me the details of your experience just now. Hobert once again elaborated on his recent encounter. Of course, he wouldn't explain the overly detailed things, such as how the psychological spoon blocked the mental attack for him. Your handling of the situation was very appropriate, Thomas said. The risks of your confrontation just now far exceeded your imagination. It can even be said that your ability to leave alive was nothing short of a miracle. Then Captain Thomas began assigning tasks. Dai Li and 2 team members escorted Hobert and the other 2 back and protected them. Thomas, meanwhile, led his team to the scene to see if they could find any clues about Keelingers. Before leaving, Hobert said, Captain Thomas, I left my cane at the scene. Please help me retrieve it. When they left earlier, there wasn't enough time to wait for the order wood to wither, but because of the special nature of the order wood, he hoped to personally burn all the order wood he had used. Thomas agreed and led his team away. Hobert and the others boarded the carriage with the Black Knight Goddess emblem. Inside the carriage, Hobert said to Zio and Furs, you'd best not return to your rented rooms for now. Furs sighed, we were planning to do that. They had to move again. Your new residence should preferably be in areas with good public security, like Wood District or St. George District, Hobert suggested. Keelingers definitely rarely operates in these areas. After all, he had to eat a homeless person every day and didn't have time to wander around Backland. Zio said with a bitter smile, the rent in those places is too expensive. They had to move frequently, and each move meant losing 10 to 20 pounds in rent. It was too extravagant. Hobert's heart stirred. You can stay at my place these next few days. There are 2 guest rooms, and I happen to be on a business trip this week, so you can help me house sit. I don't think it will be long before Keelingers is caught. Once I return from my business trip, you can go back to your original residence. Dai Li, who had been silent, suddenly said, I don't recommend you go out during this time, and Keelingers isn't that easy to catch. For the next period, you'd best stay hidden at home and not leave our sight. Leaving Backland is actually safer for me, Hobert said. I don't know why Keelingers suddenly came ashore, but I think he must have his purpose, and his purpose must be in Backland. He won't chase me out of this city. He laughed. Also, I believe that pirates committing crimes ashore is a suicidal act. He won't be rampant for long. Dai Li smiled, possibly thinking Hobert had a point, and didn't argue with him. Hobert then looked at Zio and Furs. What do you 2 think? Zio and Furs had already exchanged glances. They had left in a bit of a hurry today, only bringing a few pounds in cash to pay Darkholme for information. Having a free place to stay was, of course, the best option. After receiving their affirmative answer, the carriage headed towards 192 Blanca Street. Dai Li and the others were also happy to protect the involved parties in such a townhouse, as it meant they wouldn't have to stay up all night on the chilly streets and could even brew a hot cup of coffee late at night. Hobert went to the nearby Dixie-style restaurant and bought 6 lunches, but he, Zio, and Furs, having seen Darkholme, had no appetite at all. Hobert even thought to himself, even if I return to the Ad era, I will never eat stewed offal or lamb offal soup again. He simply pushed his lunch aside and went to write a letter home, informing his mother Monliza that a few friends had moved into his rented room recently, so that Monliza wouldn't immediately call the police if she sent a maid to clean before even entering the door. After Dai Li and the others finished their lunch, Hobert took his suitcase and document bag, and also packed his own lunch, which he had barely touched, in a meal box. Only then did he bid farewell to Zio and Furs, and asked Dai Li to take him to the train station. Zio and Furs also left, intending to tell Miss Audrey about today's encounter. Sitting in the rented carriage again, Hobert looked at Dai Li opposite him and smiled. Miss Daly, my father has a good comrade in arms in Tingen City, which means I also have a few good friends in Tingen City. Yes, I've heard some of your deeds from your time in Tingen City. Dai Li was startled for a moment, then smiled. Which passionate deed did you hear about? Hobert, however, suddenly became serious. Miss Daly, please do not ask me how I know what I am about to say, because I cannot reveal the source of the information. But this concerns the lives and deaths of Captain Dunn and other Night Watcher squad members, so please take it seriously." Hearing Dunn's name, Dai Li also put away her smile. "If you receive a request for aid from Ting'an City, do not hesitate, immediately ask your Archbishop to rush to provide support as quickly as possible." Hobert said, "Tell the Archbishop that if they are too late, the true, Creator, is very likely to descend upon Ting'an City." The surprised Dai Li was about to speak, but Hobert spoke first. "If you want to save Dunn, listen to my arrangements. If you intervene early, you might resolve the crisis, but you might also cause the cultists to hide. Your Archbishop cannot stay in Ting'an City indefinitely. If the crisis isn't completely resolved, the Night Watcher squad members in Ting'an City will still be doomed to die after the Archbishop leaves. So, the best way is to root them out after they begin their actions." This was, of course, just a clever excuse. The main reason Hobert didn't want the forces from Backland to intervene early was to deal with Ince Zangwill, who possessed 008. In Ince's plan, Dunn was destined to die. Even if it wasn't to deal with the descending offspring of the evil god, Death, he would surely die in other incidents while holding Serena's ashes, because only the captain of the Night Watcher squad had the authority to use Serena's ashes. Hobert had considered many plans recently. Only by letting Ince begin his actions and then disrupting the story, 008 had concocted could he have a chance to eliminate Ince, completely resolve the Ting'an City crisis, and truly save Dunn. No one else would think of or use this method except Hobert, because only Hobert clearly knew Ince's plan. Hobert emphasized again, "If you want to completely help Dunn resolve the crisis, you must follow my arrangements." Dai Li stared at Hobert for a full 5 or 6 seconds before saying, "I will cooperate with you, and if what you said truly happens, I will also help you cover it up." Hobert breathed a sigh of relief. Talking to Dai Li was the most variable and hardest to control step in his plan. Arriving at the train station, Dai Li said with a somewhat solemn expression, "After you return, we need to have a good talk." "Don't say that," Hobert said. "Usually, in in plays, when such a line appears, the person going on a long journey definitely won't come back." Hobert quickly grabbed his suitcase and got out of the carriage. He first went to the post office next to the train station to mail his letter, and then went to buy a ticket to Ting'an City. Dai Li watched Hobert's receding figure, somewhat lost in thought. First, she wondered where Hobert got such important news about the advent of an evil god. Klein, a formal member of the Ting'an City Night Watcher squad who had just written to her for advice on spiritualism, seemed unaware of it. Then she wondered why Hobert knew about her feelings for Dunn. Theoretically, only she and Dunn should know about this feeling. Could it be that all the members of the Ting'an City Night Watcher squad had noticed? Only Dunn pretended not to know. Dai Li gave a bitter smile. If that were true, it would be too pathetic. Hypnosis. In the train station's restroom, Hobert used the psychological spoon to hypnosis himself, making himself forget all knowledge about 008, until he met Maigao Aosi and the evil god's offspring at the Blackthorn Security Company in Ting'an City. Hobert's eyes were vacant for about a second, then he looked at himself in the mirror with a sense of loss. Suddenly, tears streamed down his face, and he wanted to cry out loud. Distortion. Hobert even forgot why he had used the psychological spoon. He distorted his emotions, so tears just flowed down, but he didn't cry out loud. Once on the train, Hobert's mood gradually became immersed in the journey. He had finally left Backland, which was surrounded by a thick fog. Although Hobert had become a Beander and his physique had greatly improved, the frequent lack of sunlight and the night arriving more than an hour early still made him feel very depressed. About an hour after the train departed, Hobert, who was enjoying the scenery outside, indeed felt hungry. He took out the packed lunch he had brought and began to eat. It wasn't that he was particularly frugal, but after seeing the East District of Backland, he felt that wasting food was a very shameful thing. At around 2:50, Hobert, who had just finished his late dinner, covered his wallet through his clothes and covered his face with a newspaper, feigning sleep. There was nothing he could do. His original plan was to depart in the morning, arrive in Tingen City around 1 or 2 o'clock, and then use the excuse of a lunch break to attend the tarot club in the guest room. He also hadn't expected to encounter Keelingers. For the mission of finding Keelingers, he clearly wanted to stay as far away as possible. As his thoughts churned, his vision was covered by gray fog, and he reappeared in the magnificent giant hall, as the tarot club began on time. "Good afternoon, the fool." "Justice," Audrey greeted as usual, then said, "Respected the fool, I wonder if your blessed received that £300 in compensation." The compensation Audrey referred to was to make up the price difference from last week's three-party transaction. "The fool," Klein said, "I haven't paid attention to this matter, but since my blessed hasn't requested additional help, he should have received it." "No way." Hobert mercilessly exposed him in his heart. "You probably checked the account immediately, and even confirmed it several times." "Oh, right, to prevent theft by others, you even use your own honorific name for the withdrawal password." He also thought that K was already sequence 8. While he was lost in thought, Audrey had already begun to recount Hobert and their encounter with Keelingers. After hearing the full account, Klein, hidden behind the gray fog, felt a chill for the three of them, Hobert, Hugh, and himself. The hanged man, Alger sighed, "Your lawyer friend is very calm. If he had said even one wrong word at that time, he would have been a dead man." Hobert nodded lightly, he felt the same way. Alger added, "Theoretically, even 10 sequence 8 Beyonders might not be a match for Keelingers, yet they, 1 sequence 8 and 2 sequence 9, survived. Their luck is not just ordinarily good." Audrey did not state the true names of Hobert, Hugh, and others, only referring to them as, "my lawyer friend," and "my bounty hunter friend," when telling the story. Hearing Alger's praise, Audrey was a little proud. "My lawyer friend is amazing. Although he is only sequence 8, he just participated in an intense extraordinary battle the week before last and achieved victory." Actually, she didn't know if they had truly won, but she believed that since Hobert, Hugh, and the other two hadn't suffered too severe injuries, they should be the victorious side. Hobert smiled helplessly in his heart. Hearing Audrey say that, it was as if she had achieved that victory. Next, Audrey initiated a new transaction with Alger. If Audrey found Keelingers again, Alger would provide Audrey with a perfect pituitary gland of a rainbow lizard. In this round of transactions, Audrey was clearly taken advantage of by Alger again. A main material for a sequence 8 potion, no matter how rare, would at most sell for £450. The risk of finding Keelingers' whereabouts, however, far exceeded that price. At least Hobert felt that way. On this point, he believed he had some right to speak. After all, he had just fought with Keelingers and still felt lingering fear when he thought about it now. However, Hobert did not speak up to remind her. He knew Audrey didn't care about a few coins, and he didn't want to cause unpleasantness with Alger over something Audrey didn't care about. Due to the rainbow lizard pituitary gland transaction, Audrey and Alger extended their discussion to this nearly extinct extraordinary creature. Audrey asked, "If the rainbow lizard becomes extinct, does that mean the spectator pathway will be interrupted?" "No," Hobert replied. "Do you remember the conservation of extraordinary characteristics we discussed before? When one extraordinary material is exhausted, another material with similar effects will definitely replace it." Audrey was somewhat in a trance. "I didn't expect the conservation of extraordinary characteristics to have such a wide range of applications." It was only then that she deeply realized how valuable the knowledge Emperor had spoken of was. Then she also realized that the Sun had not yet attended the gathering at that time, so Audrey asked, "Mr. Sun, do you need me to explain the conservation of extraordinary characteristics to you?" "No need, the Sun," Derek said. "This is knowledge we have in our textbooks." Audrey was slightly stunned, then smiled. "I really wish I could go to Silver City for a few days of school." Derek said with a somewhat dim expression, "This place of ours is abandoned by God, no one would be willing to come." Upon hearing this, Audrey didn't know how to comfort the Sun. After a few seconds of silence in the hall, Klein suddenly asked the Sun, "Does Silver City still believe in deities?" Upon hearing this question, Both Audrey and Alger perked up their ears and listened carefully. Derek said with a reverent tone, "We still believe in the Lord who created everything, the Almighty God." Audrey was somewhat surprised. They actually directly believed in the Creator himself. One must know that in mythical stories, the Creator had long been divided among various gods and races, and in a modern sense, that was merely a symbolic meaning. Alger also found it strange. Their description of God was a bit odd, omniscient and omnipotent. What exactly is omniscient and omnipotent? Hobert suddenly asked, do your records contain any descriptions of the Almighty God's dominion? Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. And please support the author by link in description. Hobert's question made Audrey's eyes light up, almost causing Alger to blurt out praise, and even Klein sighed, "This question is brilliant." Once the ruling area of the Almighty God is known, comparing it with the geography of the North-South continent and the location of Silver City, the approximate direction of the forsaken land of the gods can be determined. Derek said, there are relevant descriptions. The textbook says, wherever sunlight shines, there are followers of the Lord, including the land of dragons, the land of elves, the land of blood, the land of the undying bird, and our land of giants. Hobert had initially lamented that, Little Son, was too straightforward, answering every question, but then he asked, who can tell me where the land of dragons is? Audrey covered her mouth and chuckled, while Alger also smiled bitterly and shook his head. Let's sort this out. Hobert immediately realized there were still clues. Derek mentioned 5 areas in total, likely corresponding to 5 of the 8 ancient gods. These 5 ancient gods should all have been hammered to death by ancient sun god, and then the people there began to believe in the Almighty God. Hobert asked, in what general direction from Silver City is the land of the undying bird? Approximately how far is it from you all? According to the book, it's roughly to our north, Derek replied, but the book doesn't specify the exact distance. Hobert nodded, meaning this area must be in the God-forsaken land. What about the land of blood? It's directly south of Silver City, Little Son answered. Hobert compared it with his geographical knowledge from the Ad era, which would be roughly the location of Africa in the Ad era, and it should now also be within the God-forsaken land. The giant court should be to your west, right? Derek said with some excitement, Emperor, you actually know about the giant court. Audrey wasn't surprised at all. Emperor already knew some strange and unusual things. Alger, however, gave Hobert a deep look. He once again wondered if Emperor, like the Fool, was a hidden existence in the process of awakening. Otherwise, how could he know so much ancient knowledge? I just read about it in a book, Hobert said truthfully. I was deeply impressed by that court which is always in twilight. Little Son nodded repeatedly, our textbooks describe it the same way. Audrey let her imagination roam, picturing a grand palace perpetually bathed in twilight. She felt a surge of inspiration for a painting, but alas, there were no brushes or canvas here. Klein, behind the gray fog, also realized that deities not only symbolized supreme power but also represented atmospheric conditions, climate, or a fixed moment like twilight or night. After the exchange with Little Son, Hobert generally understood the geography of the God-forsaken land. He then asked, let's continue to sort this out. In what general direction from Silver City is the land of elves? Directly west. And the land of dragons? Northwest. This way, our geographical concepts are basically combined, Hobert said. The land of elves corresponds to the archipelago between the South Continent and the North Continent and the Dissy Bay area, while the land of dragons is roughly the current North Continent. Hobert said to Derek, Silver City is to the east of the Ruined Kingdom, or a little to the north or south, but in any case, it's in the eastern part of the Sonia Sea. Derek stood up excitedly, then sat back down. The world protected by a true God seemed both impossibly distant and within reach. Regardless, those places genuinely existed. Alger also straightened himself. He hadn't expected Emperor to so easily analyze the general location of the God-forsaken land, and he explained it very generously. Emperor must also enjoy this process of use his knowledge to synthesize new information. In fact, for Hobert, the approximate location of the God-forsaken land wasn't particularly valuable information. It was the geographical differences between modern and ancient times that truly interested him. Audrey asked curiously, "Hanged man, you've always roamed the seas, so have you ever been to the Sonia Sea? Why has no one managed to cross that sea area and find the God-forsaken land until now? I've heard that the eastern part of the Sonia Sea is even more dangerous than the raging sea." Alger said, "Of course, many people go there to search for treasure, but most of them never return. Even among those who do return, most have become deranged madmen. Only a very few know about the situation in the eastern Sonia Sea, but they are unwilling to share their experiences with others." Audrey looked at Hobert again. "Emperor, do you know why?" Derek also looked at Hobert. It was clear he was even a little nervous. "I only know a general idea," Hobert said with a smile, "but this information is so advanced you can hardly imagine it. If you ever want to trade for related information, please prepare 20,000 gold pounds in advance." 2. Even the wealthy Audrey was startled. Only a very few people in the entire Ruined Kingdom had wealth exceeding 20,000 gold pounds. How advanced was this information? Could it create a rich person out of thin air? Klein, sitting at the head of the table, would have revealed his composure if not for the obstruction of the gray fog. Emperor is truly generous when he wants to be, but when he trades, he really dares to name his price. 20,000 gold pounds. This is wealth most people wouldn't even dare to dream of. The 300 pounds in his account suddenly didn't seem so appealing. However, this also precisely indicated how advanced this information was. Klein even had some hope that Miss Justice would make the trade, but seeing that even Miss Justice, the wealthiest member of the Tarot Club, was hesitant, he knew this transaction would not be concluded anytime soon. Hobert smiled and said, "Many geographical facts that seem like common sense to us actually contain very advanced information. For example, the raging sea wasn't always so raging. Before the Four Emperors' War, it was just an ordinary sea. As for why it became raging, that is also very advanced information." He asked, "Miss Justice, do you still think the price I offered is expensive? This kind of information is completely priceless on the market, and there wouldn't be such an advanced transaction at other gatherings." Audrey seemed to have rediscovered the curiosity and excitement she felt when she first encountered mysticism. "It's not expensive at all, but I'll have to save up for a few months before I can trade with you." Derek said, somewhat at a loss, "Emperor, I. He wanted to trade with Emperor right now, but even if he didn't know the exact value of gold pounds, he could tell from the expressions of the other members that the price Emperor was asking was very, very high." Hobert smiled and said, "Don't be impatient. Even if you get this knowledge now, it won't be of much use. My suggestion is, you should explore as you always have. I believe your elders know which direction to explore. You don't need to worry about that. With the protection and guidance of the Fool, all of you participating in this gathering will certainly have the opportunity to gradually learn these hidden pieces of information in the future." Klein, hidden behind the gray fog, smiled bitterly. "I didn't even know I had such hidden information here." However, Emperor's words perfectly upheld his authority, so Klein said nothing, sitting quietly in his chair as usual, watching everyone. Hobert's reassurance made Derek sigh in relief. Yes, he could still get help from the Fool. Silver City seemed to instantly have hope. Alger suddenly asked Hobert, "You just found that the land of elves and the land of dragons correspond to the archipelago and the North Continent respectively. What about the South Continent? What region does the South Continent correspond to? The South Continent should not be included in the Sun's description just now." Hobert asked Derek, "Besides the place that believes in the Almighty God, are there no other regions?" Derek thought seriously for a moment. "No, the geographical descriptions in our textbooks are very simple." His expression was a bit dim as he said, "Because even if we know about those places, we can't go there. Do you still remember the original text in the textbook? I generally remember. As long as there is sunlight, there are believers of God. Then there are the 5 regions we just talked about. The last sentence is, the Almighty God brought eternal peace, and only God's believers can receive the grace of light and civilization. In other words, there are still people who are not believers of God and cannot receive the grace of light and civilization. Hobert analyzed, based on the 5 regions and the related descriptions of the 8 ancient gods just now. Audrey immediately noticed the key point in Hobert's words just now, 8 ancient gods. There are still ancient gods. That's right, the Almighty God should also be considered an ancient god, right? Alger pinched his chin. Why have I never heard of the 8 ancient gods? He was almost certain that Emperor must have a close connection with the fool. Were they allies a long time ago? So they are waking up together now. Klein also had some conjectures, believing that the 8 ancient gods should be figures from the legendary third epic or even the second epic. Hobert said, "Oh, if you want to know the detailed information about the 8 ancient gods, you need to trade with me or the sun." He was reminding the sun that this information could be traded. Hobert continued, based on the comparison of the 5 regions and the related descriptions of the 8 ancient gods, there are still 3 ancient gods whose ruled areas have not been mentioned. Among them is Strange King. Considering that there are many strangers in the South Continent now, can we make such a deduction? The regions ruled by the 3 unmentioned ancient gods include our familiar South Continent. Alger nodded. Your erudition once again amazes me. Hobert smiled slightly, accepting the compliment. The hall was quiet for a few seconds, and the fool asked Derek in a low, slow tone, "Do you still offer sacrifices to the Almighty God?" "Yes, we still offer sacrifices to him." Derek's tone contained an undisguised sorrow. "We were once ruled by Giant Court, and we believed in Giant King Olmir. Later, we received the Lord's salvation. We will never abandon the Lord again. We all believe that we will eventually regain the Lord's favor, perhaps on the day the sun rises again." Alger frowned. Ruled by Giant Court. He had read the secret chapters of the Book of Storms, which described the second epic, an epic called the Dark Epic, where the protagonists of the sky, sea, and earth were races such as dragons, giants, and elves. But in the end, Storm of Lord, eternal blazing sun, and God of knowledge and wisdom led humanity to defeat these extraordinary creatures one by one, ushering in the glorious age, at the beginning of the third epic, followed by the great cataclysm. Although Audrey didn't understand, she listened very carefully. Only Hobert sat there relaxed, listening. Klein then said, "Describe your sacrifice process in detail." Alger was so excited that his whole body trembled. Does the fool want to find out the truth about Silver City being abandoned? Or does he want to confirm whether that creator still exists? These thoughts made Alger feel that his own level had been elevated. He sighed. This is a secret between deities. Don't I pursue authority and power just to gain this feeling? Audrey didn't understand what was so exciting about this. Hobert, on the other hand, turned his head away to hide his smile. The hanged man's reaction is so strong. You might not imagine that this is the fool learning about sacrifices from Little Sun. Derek honestly replied, "We have magnificent altars built." After discussing the sacrifices, Klein ended today's gathering. The moment they left the giant hall, Alger and the others once again marveled at how this gathering had once again broken their perceptions. Woo! The whistle of the train reached Hobert's ears. He put away the newspaper and pretended to be woken up by the whistle. More than 2 hours later, the train arrived at the station, and Hobert came to Tingen City, a place of special significance to him. In the suburbs of Tingen, in a house with a dark red chimney and a green lawn. Ince Zangwil, returning from the restroom, saw the quill pen scribbling on his notebook by itself. He quickly grabbed the quill and looked at the notebook. The content on it was, Hobert Jeffrey seems to have come to Tingen City because of a commercial dispute. Otherwise, why? Is it to save Tingen City? He got off the train, stretched, and said, "Hello, Tingen City." Ince frowned and pondered for a moment, not remembering any powerful person named Hobert. Although he was wary, he didn't take it seriously. 008 had tried to write him to death more than once or twice. As long as he interrupted 008's writing in time, harmful events would not happen to him, and harmful characters would not appear in his story again. After Hobert got off the train, like many other passengers, he stretched vigorously, then smiled. Hello, Tingen City. He had come to the place where everything began, like a primary school student entering a history museum, a little excited, a little curious. Walking out of the platform, he saw a servant-dressed person holding a blackboard with, "Young Master Hobert," written on it. Beside the servant stood a military man in his 40s, with dark skin and a scar on his forehead. Hobert walked over and said, "Hello, I am Hobert Jeffrey. Welcome to Tingen City." The military man forced out a stiff smile and said, "I am Ulysses, your father's adjutant when he was in the South Continent." Christine had already sent a telegram to Ulysses informing him of Hobert's approximate arrival time in Tingen City. "Hello, Mr. Ulysses, my father often praised your bravery in front of us." Ulysses invited Hobert into the carriage while saying, "No, Commander Christine always rushed ahead of me, even when he was already a lieutenant colonel." Sitting in the carriage, Hobert finally took out Christine's handwritten letter. Although he was very curious about the content of the letter, he did not open it privately. Ulysses immediately opened the handwritten letter. It seemed very short, and he put it away after a quick glance. It was clear that Ulysses was not a very talkative person. "Is this your first time in Tingen City?" "Yes," Hobert said with a smile. "The scenery here is much more beautiful than Backland, but then again, because of Backland's fog, you can't see the city's scenery at all. At least it's prosperous." Ulysses ignored Hobert's joke. "Commander Christine's telegram said you're on a business trip for your law firm." "Yes, to handle a commercial dispute. I will be defending the defendant." "The defendant wouldn't happen to be Dominic, would he?" Hobert was taken aback. "How did you guess?" Ulysses said with a straight face, "Dominic is my brother-in-law. I heard him talk about this matter." Hobert laughed. "What a coincidence." Ulysses spread his hands. "The circle in Tingen City isn't that big." He said, "I'll have the butler arrange a carriage for you. It will be at your disposal during your stay in Tingen City. If you need me to step in, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you for your help." The residence Ulysses arranged for Hobert was a villa in the suburbs. After escorting Hobert to the villa, he had the butler arrange the guest room and carriage, and then he left the villa. It was only during a conversation with the butler that Hobert learned this villa was one of Ulysses' many properties. Ulysses' good friends or comrades would only be arranged to stay here when they came to Tingen City. Hobert thought to himself, now this is more like a high-ranking officer. Recalling Christine, although his villa in the center of Backland could buy several villas in Tingen City, he only had that one property. Compared to his former subordinate Ulysses, he seemed a bit shabby. Hobert then thought, of course, there might also be other properties he doesn't know about. The room prepared for Hobert was indeed much more comfortable than a hotel. The decor wasn't overly luxurious, it was very elegant, and the furniture was quite refined. After resting for a bit, Hobert saw that it was already very late, so he decided to visit Claude tomorrow. Ulysses was busy with official duties and did not come to entertain Hobert. In the large dining room, Hobert dined alone, feeling a little unaccustomed to the sudden luxurious lifestyle. After dinner, Hobert took a walk in the garden. He looked at the night sky, wondering what Kay, who was in the same city, was doing now. At this moment, Klein had just finished dinner and was sitting on the single sofa in the living room, leisurely reading the Ahorva evening news that had just arrived. Benson, with a bitter expression, was reading a grammar book. Melissa was also busy. Textbooks, stationery, a compass, and a ruler were laid out in front of her, as if she were doing homework. Suddenly, the gaslights in the living room and dining room dimmed. The three siblings simultaneously looked at the lights, trying to find the cause. Just then, Klein felt something touch his arm. There was no one else beside him, and this light touch immediately made his hair stand on end. He activated his spirit vision and immediately saw a small, pale hand beside him, holding a neatly folded piece of paper. It was the messenger. Klein breathed a sigh of relief and, under the cover of the newspaper, took the letter. The messenger then left. Strange, Melissa muttered in front of the gaslight, checking for a long time but finding no problem. Klein shook his head and chuckled. Why is it that in our family, the girls are responsible for this kind of thing, while the men just watch from the side? Once the gaslights were normal, everyone went back to their respective tasks. Under the cover of the newspaper, Klein opened the letter. It was indeed a reply from Miss Daly. In the letter, she meticulously explained the relevant knowledge and precautions for spiritualism. This knowledge greatly benefited Klein. At the end of the letter, Daly wrote, "If you encounter something difficult to understand or difficult to solve recently, do not hesitate. Immediately send a telegram to Backlund for help." Klein gave a wry smile. "Miss Daly, did you get some news? Why do you have to make it sound so scary?" Early the next morning, Hobert took the two-wheeled carriage provided for him and arrived at Dominic's company to discuss the case in detail with Dominic. He planned to contact K. Dunn in a day or two, and he wanted the contact to be as natural as possible. As for why it had to be natural, he couldn't recall at the moment, but in his plan, this contact absolutely had to be natural. Claude's case was not complicated. In the first half of this year, at Dominic's initiative, he invested in a batch of futures with another wealthy man, Claude. However, when this batch of goods passed through the raging sea, it was either hijacked by pirates or encountered a shipwreck. In short, this investment failed. For Dominic, this was just one of his many investments, and the losses he suffered were acceptable to him. However, Claude was recently facing a financial crisis, and this investment was very important to him. After the investment failed, Claude hoped that Dominic, the initiator of this investment, would pay him a compensation. He believed that this investment was much riskier than Dominic had described, and that Dominic was committing fraud. Dominic, of course, would not pay compensation. He believed that Claude was short on money now and therefore wanted to extort him. So, after several communications failed to reach a satisfactory solution, Claude sued Dominic. Dominic's regular lawyer suddenly fell ill and was hospitalized. Through a friend's introduction, he found Barton Lawyer. Dominic had not expected that Barton Lawyer would only send an assistant to handle this case, but after a few words, he found that this young man had clear thinking and high professional ethics, which reassured him enough to sign the entrustment agreement. Next, Hobert went to visit the plaintiff's lawyer. The plaintiff's lawyer was quite polite. He also knew that Claude's chances of winning were slim, but in order to secure benefits for his client, he still hoped that Dominic would pay some compensation to settle the matter. The two talked for half a day, but made little progress. In the afternoon, Hobert went to visit Claude. Claude was in his 40s. His company was deserted, and the large office building seemed to have only one secretary working. "It's too late," Claude, with bloodshot eyes and smoking a cigarette, sneered, "everything is too late. Dominic will pay for everything he has done." Ultimately, the conversation ended unhappily. Hobert organized the materials and returned to Dominic's place around 5 in the afternoon. As the two men had just sat down on the sofa, a girl of 16 or 17 pushed open the door. She was wearing a blue lace dress, her brown hair was naturally curly, and she had a cute baby face. Upon seeing Hobert, she said apologetically, "Sorry, Papa, I didn't know you had a guest." Dominic stood up and introduced, "This is Mr. Hobert, a young and promising lawyer from Backlund. And this is my daughter, Elizabeth." Hobert glanced at the baby fat on the girl's face. "It must be Melissa's good friend Elizabeth, right? Is the world really that small?" Hobert and Elizabeth greeted each other politely. "Hobert, you should have told me earlier that you were Ulysses's friend," Dominic said with a smile. "If we hadn't met at a banquet at noon, I wouldn't have known." Elizabeth, standing nearby, curiously sized up Hobert. In her impression, her uncle Ulysses seemed to dislike socializing very much. Hobert smiled and corrected him, "My father and Ulysses were comrades in arms. I am actually Ulysses's junior." Dominic laughed. "Any guest who stays in that villa in the suburbs is a good friend of Ulysses." Elizabeth did not intend to continue listening to their conversation. She politely excused herself and went to wait in the secretary's office. She had come to tell her father that she needed to take leave tomorrow morning to accompany her good friend Serena to the cemetery to pay respects to her teacher. Because of the terrible divination she had received earlier, Elizabeth was worried about her friend acting alone. If anything unexpected happened, she could immediately ask Melissa's brother for help. Hobert and Dominic resumed discussing the case. After learning the results of today's visit, Dominic smoked and shook his head with a laugh. Investment failure is a perfectly normal thing, and Claude lost everything because he was too greedy. I owe him nothing, and I won't give him a single penny of so-called compensation. According to Dominic's request, Hobert conducted an analysis and concluded that the probability of winning the lawsuit was very high. As he was about to leave, he suddenly recalled Claude's demeanor, so he reminded Dominic, "Claude seems to be at his wit's end right now. Be careful that he doesn't do anything irrational." Dominic smiled and shook his head. "As long as he has a brain, he wouldn't dare do anything to me." After all, his wife's brother, Ulysses, was the chief of staff of the Intersea Naval District. Backland, at the Hall household. Audrey stared blankly at the painting in front of her. "Grand Hall at dusk," the Countess said, looking at the work on the easel. "A wonderful idea, Mama," Audrey said with a smile. "I've been feeling a constant surge of inspiration lately. Look at this painting of mine, too." She took out a painting from the side. The background of the painting was a courtroom, with a laughing young lawyer, a helpless judge, and a gloomy middle-aged lawyer. The well-preserved Countess asked, "Is this the work injury compensation case that has recently caused a heated discussion?" "Kind Countess, what can we do for that poor worker?" "My dear, I know your kindness makes you sympathize with that worker, but there's nothing we can do." This case was no longer just a simple compensation case, it had brought the conflict between two classes before everyone. Audrey felt a little disappointed. Through her spectator abilities and the education she had received since childhood, she understood her mother's meaning. At this time, not helping the defendant Arnold was already a form of benevolence. These past few days, she had been trying to guide her parents, hoping they would side with Hobert and Bob, but it was clear she had failed. The Countess did not continue the topic but noticed that the painting was already framed. She smiled and asked, "Is this painting a gift?" "Yes." Audrey also did not continue the previous topic. "Beautiful Countess, would you be willing to be my model?" "Not now, dear," the Countess said. "I came to tell you that you are to accompany us to Duke Negan's ball tomorrow evening." Audrey glanced again at the painting depicting the courtroom. She whispered, "The cost of a single ball held by the Duke would probably be more than £1,000, wouldn't it?" "What did you just say?" "Nothing, Mama," Audrey said with a smile. "I will prepare in advance." Hobert breathed in the damp morning air by the window. The air in Tingen City was much better than in Backland. He changed his clothes and had breakfast, served by the servants. Just as Hobert was about to leave, the butler stepped forward and said, "Young Master Hobert, the master is preparing a welcome banquet for you here tomorrow evening. Do you have time tomorrow evening? If there's a conflict, other arrangements can be made. Please thank Ulysses for his warm hospitality on my behalf," Hobert said with a smile. "As the guest, I'll follow the host's lead. I have time." "All right, I will convey your gratitude." Hobert got into the carriage and went to Dominic's company again. He planned to chat with Dominic for a few minutes first, to let the client know that he was working hard on his case. Then he planned to go to Blackthorn Security Company. The reason for going to the security company was originally to ask the local forces to investigate the authenticity of the clues that appeared in this case. However, Claude's reaction yesterday gave Hobert new inspiration. He planned to ask the security company to help investigate whether Claude had any illegal intentions. But when he met Dominic, he found him pacing in the office. Although he seemed to be trying hard to hide his anxiety, his eyes and slightly trembling fingers betrayed him. Hobert smiled and said, "It seems I've come at a bad time. Is there anything I can help with?" Dominic took a deep breath before saying, "Elizabeth is missing." Missing? Yes, this morning Elizabeth didn't go to school but went out with a friend, Dominic recounted. But just now, Elizabeth's two friends came, and only then did I learn that they had arranged to meet at 8 o'clock, but they still haven't seen Elizabeth. It was around 10 in the morning, which meant Elizabeth had been missing for over 2 hours. Hobert asked, "Have you called the police?" "I have," Dominic said somewhat anxiously. "The police said they would help search, but they also reminded me that it's not yet time to file a case. If it were an ordinary person reporting the case, the police would not accept it at all." Dominic seemed to suddenly think of something. "Yesterday, I should have taken your warning seriously. Claude might not harm me, but, oh, poor Elizabeth." Dominic suddenly stopped pacing. "I'm going to find Claude right now. He can have as much compensation as he wants, but he cannot harm Elizabeth." "Please calm down, Dominic," Hobert took the opportunity to say. "If you go to Claude now, you might also disappear." He said, "Why don't we ask a security company for help? They can also help search for Elizabeth. I happen to know one with excellent business capabilities." "Look at me, I'm so flustered," Dominic interrupted Hobert. "Thank you for the reminder. I have a long-term partnership with a Hova security company. I can ask them for help." "Listen to me, Dominic, I can guarantee that no security company will be more efficient than Blackthorn Security Company." No, Hobert, you don't know the situation here in Tingen City. The Blackthorn Security Company you mentioned is completely unknown. I still trust a Hova security company more." Hobert hesitated to speak further. If he tried to persuade him more, he believed Dominic would start to suspect if he had received any benefits from Blackthorn Security Company. "Are Elizabeth's two friends still here?" "They are, in the reception room." "Then I'll take them back." Dominic patted his forehead. "Look at my memory, then I'll trouble you." As the saying goes, concern makes one confused. No matter how successful or composed he was in business, as a father, he was already burning with anxiety. Upon seeing the two young girls waiting in the reception room, Hobert had a premonition. Upon asking, the two girls were indeed two acquaintances, Melissa Moretti and Serena Wood. Melissa had brown eyes and black hair. She looked a bit thin, but her complexion was rosy, and her skin was glowing, exuding a youthful aura. Hobert remembered that when Kay first transmigrated, this young girl's complexion was even pale due to long-term malnutrition. Now she looked much healthier, which also proved that after Kay got a job, their family's living conditions had improved significantly. Serena, on the other hand, had striking wine-red hair and two deep dimples. Sitting together, she appeared more eye-catching. After a few pleasantries, Hobert sighed, grateful that Melissa was alert. When Elizabeth didn't appear at the agreed time, she immediately realized something was wrong and then came to report it, accompanied by Serena. Otherwise, in this era without mobile phones or telephones, it was very likely that Elizabeth's family would only discover her disappearance around noon or in the afternoon because she hadn't returned home in time. "I am Mr. Dominic's lawyer," Hobert said. "Mr. Dominic is working hard to find Elizabeth, and he entrusted me to take you two back." Melissa said, "Actually, we still want to wait here for a bit." "Yes," Serena said, "otherwise, we won't be able to rest easy when we go back." She said with a tearful face, "It's all my fault. If I hadn't insisted on paying respects to my teacher, Elizabeth wouldn't have gotten into trouble." "You still want to pay respects to that cultists?" Hobert thought to himself, "What were you thinking? Such waiting is meaningless," he said. "If Elizabeth is found, you will be notified immediately." Under Hobert's persuasion, the two girls finally agreed to go back first. Inside the carriage, the talkative Serena chatted with Hobert for a few minutes. She was full of curiosity about the nature of Hobert's work. During their chat, Serena casually said, "Elizabeth should have met us on this road." Hobert was startled and began to pay attention to the details on the road, trying to find the location where Elizabeth was kidnapped. But he quickly realized that he had no talent for being a detective and found no clues. At this moment, Hobert truly envied Kay's ability. With just one personal item of Elizabeth's, he could use divination to find people. Although Hobert had the psychic necklace, it could only perform very simple divinations and could not be used to find people at all. He planned to immediately go to Blackthorn Security Company for help after sending Melissa and Serena back. The two girls attended the same school. After watching them enter the school gate, Hobert did not leave immediately. Instead, he first discussed with the coachman how to get to Blackthorn Security Company. Because Hobert really couldn't remember the address of Blackthorn Security Company in Tingen City. If it were an address like Jifang Road or Nanjing Road, he would definitely still remember it, but Blanca Street and Minsk Street were really hard to remember. And the coachman had never heard of such a security company, which showed that Blackthorn Security Company had no standing in the security industry whatsoever. Fortunately, Hobert still remembered that Blackthorn Security Company was not far from Black Knight Goddess Church. He might have to ask once he got near there, or simply find it himself. Just as he was about to leave, Hobert saw Melissa and Serena come out of the school again. They were also a bit surprised to see that Hobert hadn't left yet. Hobert opened the car window and asked, "Did you leave something behind?" "No," Serena said. "We're going to look for Elizabeth. We've thought of a new clue." Hobert simply opened the car door and got out, saying, "That's too dangerous. You can tell me the clue, and I'll handle it." But Serena shook her head and said, "We must also participate in the search for Elizabeth, otherwise, we won't tell you." Apparently, they had obediently returned to school earlier, planning to avoid Hobert. If Hobert hadn't waited there for a few minutes, they would have acted on their own. Hobert sighed, "All right, get in." At least with him by their side, he could keep an eye on these two troublesome girls. Once back in the carriage, Melissa said, "We just thought that since Elizabeth was kidnapped on her way to the appointment, the kidnappers most likely hid Elizabeth in vacant houses or sparsely populated places along the way." Serena said, "I've thought of a few possible locations. We can search them one by one. But to save time, I think we should get a divination." Hobert was startled, thinking to himself, "Your half-baked divination skills won't get us all killed, will they?" I know, it sounds a bit ridiculous," Serena said with a helpless smile. "But lawyer, I know a real diviner, and he will definitely give us enough clues." Hobert glanced at Melissa beside him. "Of course, you certainly know him." "Lawyer, do you also believe in mysticism?" Serena smiled. "Believe me, Mr. Achilles' divination is incredibly effective, even more powerful than my deceased teacher, and his residence is not far from here." "Is this connecting with the Aurora Order again?" Melissa, however, said, "Serena, perhaps not getting a divination is actually saving time." "No, we need a divination right now," Hobert said with a smile. "Without further ado, let's go to Mr. Achilles' place immediately." Then he would go to Blackthorn Security Company and report this Aurora Order member. He estimated that in the evening, the Night Watcher squad would go and collect the coins from the gas meter in Achilles' house. Serena clapped her hands and laughed, a wise choice. Melissa shook her head helplessly. She hadn't expected that lawyer Hobert, who seemed like an upright person, would also believe in this. Hobert naturally saw Melissa's expression. He thought to himself, "You might not believe it, but there's a great charlatan in your own home." As Serena said, Mr. Achilles' residence was not far. It took about 10 minutes by carriage to get there. It was a dimly lit room, and as soon as one entered, a pungent smell of herbs could be detected. The walls of the room were adorned with some mysterious symbols, which looked quite authentic. Mr. Achilles was dressed like a charlatan, wearing loose silk robes, with disheveled hair and mysterious oil paint symbols on his face, making his features unclear. He sat quietly in the darkest part of the room, as if he had merged with the darkness. The furnishings here in Achilles' attire immediately made Melissa's expression serious, while Hobert frowned. His spiritual intuition sensed danger. This Mr. Achilles was very powerful. However, Hobert was not afraid. Ever since he arrived in Tingen City, the teleportation statue had always been with him. Only at night would he place the stone box further away to avoid its negative effects. Mr. Achilles, my friend is missing, and we hope you can help us divine her whereabouts, Serena said, skillfully sitting opposite Achilles. Achilles looked at the two strangers behind Serena, who quickly introduced, "They are my friends." Achilles paused on Hobert for a second or two, then withdrew his gaze. "I need her hair, blood, nails, or something she frequently uses." Serena was prepared and took out a headpiece. "Elizabeth gave this to me last week. She wore it for a while before, and I haven't had a chance to wear it yet." Achilles nodded, took out a crystal ball, and placed the headpiece under it. Then he began to chant spells in a theatrical manner, as if entering a state of frenzy. Serena, and even Melissa, were utterly awestruck, but only Hobert watched coldly from the side. He knew that such divination did not require any messy spells, and he also guessed that the Achilles in front of him should be a Beander from the secret supplicant pathway. The abundant spirituality of a secret supplicant is enough for them to use some tools to perform operations like divination. However, Achilles should be a sequence 7 or sequence 8, and all of a secret supplicant's abilities should be enhanced. After a series of actions, Achilles took a deep breath, recovering from his frenzied state, and touching the crystal ball with one hand, he said, "Your friend is in an abandoned villa in the eastern suburbs. Hurry. The perpetrators are about to leave there. If you're late, you won't find them." Serena said, "Thank you, Mr. Achilles." With that, she stood up to leave. Hobert, however, asked, "What is the fee for the divination?" Achilles glanced at Hobert. "Serena's divination is free." Serena smiled with a hint of pride. "No," Hobert said, "I believe every gift of fate has a price tag." He added, "Besides, this is out of respect for you and the divination." Achilles stared at Hobert for a second or two before saying, 5 Sul. Hobert handed the 5 Sul paper bill to Achilles, then said, "Please return the headpiece to me." He spread his handkerchief in his palm and extended it towards Achilles. Achilles took the money and placed the headpiece, which had been crushed by the crystal ball, onto the handkerchief. Both of their movements were slow, as if they were conducting a transaction more dangerous than high explosives. Finally, Hobert put away his handkerchief, and the atmosphere in the room immediately eased. Serena thanked Mr. Achilles again, and the three of them left the gloomy room one after another. After getting into the carriage, Hobert instructed the coachman to head east, towards an abandoned villa. Inside the carriage, Melissa was somewhat surprised. "Lawyer, you don't actually believe the divination result just now, do you?" Serena smiled and said, "Why not?" Hobert said sternly, "Miss Serena, in your future interactions with these enthusiasts of mysticism, please always remember the principle of equivalent exchange. If anyone is willing to provide you with some mystical services for free, then it must be because he has a larger agenda." Serena was startled at first, then laughed. "Lawyer, are you also a mysticism enthusiast?" And Hobert continued gravely, "Do not leave your own, or your family's or friends' blood, hair, nails, or items you frequently carry with you, to others." He handed over his handkerchief. "These things can be used to find people, and they can also be used for curses." The smile on Serena's face disappeared, and she took the handkerchief with both hands. "I've noted that." Then Hobert answered Melissa's question. "Let's temporarily believe the other party's divination, otherwise, we have no other clues." As for Achilles' divination result, Hobert estimated it should be correct. After all, Achilles needed to maintain his charlatan image in front of Serena. Melissa nodded and said no more. Hobert then asked, "Miss Serena, how did you meet Achilles?" "After my divination teacher, Heiner van Saun, passed away, I went to pay my respects," Serena replied. "I met Mr. Achilles in the cemetery, who had the same purpose." Hobert nodded. Heiner's exposure and sudden death would surely attract the attention and investigation of the Aurora Order. And this Achilles, he feared, was an investigator sent by the Aurora Order, establishing contact with Heiner's students, of course, to more conveniently investigate the cause of Heiner's death and exposure. However, he was truly arrogant, daring to appear openly before Heiner's grave. Was he not afraid of potential surveillance by official beyonders? Then Hobert felt relieved. These were a bunch of lunatics, and their thoughts simply couldn't be fathomed by common sense. Hobert then said, "Today is Wednesday. Aren't you supposed to be in class? Why did you have to pay respects to Heiner today?" "Recently, I've frequently dreamt of my teacher," Serena said with a bitter smile. "And the dreams are all similar, urging me to pay my respects to him as soon as possible." As soon as she finished speaking, she saw the lawyer close his eyes. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination, but when the lawyer opened his eyes again, his pupils seemed to have become even deeper. This was certainly not her imagination. Hobert had activated his spirit vision, and with the psychic necklace's blessing, his spirit vision could see all undead creatures. But he found nothing. When did these similar dreams start appearing? Since. Serena thought for a moment, then looked surprised. "Since I met Mr. Achilles." "Then never go to pay respects to Heiner," Hobert said seriously. "Although I don't know what's going on, I know that as long as you appear before Heiner's grave, you will definitely suffer some harm." Serena was somewhat terrified and somewhat bewildered. "Then go to the church's confessional and explain this matter to the priest. I believe Heiner will no longer appear in your dreams," Hobert said. "Also, for your and your family's safety, do not contact Achilles again." Serena seemed to understand something, yet also seemed to understand nothing. Okay. Then she forced a smile. "Lawyer, you know so much." Hobert did not respond to Serena's compliment but continued to warn, "Unless you have a trustworthy guide, do not haphazardly seek teachers in mysticism." To be honest, this was his first time seeing a physique that attracts cultists. Just then, the coachman said, "Sir, there really is an abandoned villa." As he spoke, they had already arrived in the suburbs. Hobert told the coachman, "Don't slow down, just drive past it." The three of them looked through the carriage window and saw the abandoned villa, its yard overgrown with weeds. Recalling the divination just now, Melissa was somewhat surprised, but she immediately thought that an abandoned villa in the suburbs seemed quite normal. Hobert smiled. "It seems this is the place. No matter what happens later, neither of you should get out of the carriage." Melissa and Serena immediately understood that the lawyer intended to rescue the person alone. Hobert saw traces of trampling and pressing on the weeds in the courtyard, and he also saw faint figures behind the trees in the courtyard, so he judged this to be the location Achilles mentioned in his divination. If he called the police, it would delay a lot of time, and if the criminals really took Elizabeth away from here, it would be very troublesome to find their traces again, so Hobert decided to immediately go and rescue Elizabeth. Besides, Hobert didn't really put a group of kidnappers in his eyes. Serena excitedly said, "Lawyer, are you going to rescue Elizabeth by yourself?" Melissa, however, calmly reminded, "They might have several more people, and they might have other weapons." Hobert smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't take risks, and I certainly won't just charge in so openly." "Melissa, don't you think this is like the grand adventures described in storybooks?" Serena said, "And we are also participants." Melissa, however, said, "The protagonist of the grand adventure is Hobert, and we are just his audience." Hobert chuckled. "This little girl is too calm, completely unlike a teenage girl." The carriage traveled for about 3 minutes, and Hobert asked the coachman to wait there. The coachman asked Hobert if he needed help, but Hobert said no after getting out of the carriage. Having the coachman nearby would only hinder him. After getting out of the carriage, Hobert quickly walked towards the abandoned villa he had just seen. In the courtyard, 2 criminals were discussing the appearance of the kidnapped girl, and they were smirking, planning to find an opportunity to have some fun with the girl. Hobert walked in openly as if he were returning to his own home, not forgetting to close the courtyard gate. Yes, when he was in front of Melissa and Serena just now, he had already planned to do this. If he wasn't a bit reckless, a bit overbearing, how could he be like a barbarian? The two criminals in the courtyard were completely confused. A companion. How come they had never seen him before? The owner of this villa. Didn't they all die of illness? Hobert smiled and said, I know this will hurt, but you brought it upon yourselves. As he spoke, he broke one criminal's nose with a punch, which knocked him out directly. Then he flipped over and kicked the other criminal's arm, breaking it. Hobert, possessing at least the strength of 3 adults, caused fractures with a single move when facing ordinary people. Hobert kicked open the somewhat decayed door, and a criminal rushed at him, wielding an axe. Hobert nimbly dodged the axe, seized the opportunity to knock the criminal down, and then kicked him unconscious. At this moment, Hobert's spirituality suddenly became alert. He almost instinctively dodged forward. Bang! A gunshot came from the side, but because of Hobert's sudden dodge, the bullet missed its target. The criminal who fired the shot was hiding behind a half-wooden door. Rude. And a sneak attack. Hobert picked up the axe from the ground and threw it in a wide arc. Crash, bang. The half-wooden door was smashed down by the whistling axe, and the axe head landed squarely on the opponent's head, splattering brains. At this moment, 2 criminals suddenly ran in from the back door. They pulled out daggers, ready to gang up on Hobert, but as soon as they took out their daggers, Hobert rushed over like a charging war chariot, knocking one flying and stunning the other with a staff. The villa immediately fell silent. Hobert was on guard against the bandits' attacks while searching for Elizabeth. There seemed to be some movement on the 2nd floor. Hobert stepped onto the somewhat decayed stairs and came to the 2nd floor, immediately seeing Elizabeth tied to a chair in the room on the left. Her mouth was gagged, and she desperately shook her head at Hobert. Hobert roughly understood the room's structure from outside and guessed there was an ambush inside, but he still walked in unhurriedly. As soon as he entered the door, he heard a sound like a heavy object being pushed from the left. Hobert glanced out of the corner of his eye and saw that it was a log as thick as a bucket being smashed towards him, with a gun-wielding criminal hiding behind the log. Such a thick log, if it hit an ordinary person, would either kill them or severely injure them, but Hobert steadily caught it with one hand. Both the criminal and Elizabeth showed expressions of surprise. Hobert directly pushed the log back, and the criminal was immediately smashed against the wall. Crash! The entire wall of the dilapidated villa was smashed down, and the criminal was smashed into the backyard, his fate unknown. Hobert first removed the towel gagging Elizabeth's mouth, then untied her. Ho! Hobert, just now. Elizabeth was still a bit incredulous. Hobert smiled and said, I've been strong since I was a child, and fighting is a lawyer's strong suit. Often when we can't persuade the other party, we choose physical persuasion. Elizabeth moved her wrists, which were numb from being tied, trying to seriously understand what physical persuasion meant. You are a barbarian. Suddenly, a sinister voice came from the room. It was Achilles' voice. Hobert immediately stood up, raising his staff with one hand and reaching into the cloth pouch he carried with him with the other, ready to open the stone box and take out the teleportation statue at any moment. His ability to find an enemy's weaknesses came into play, and he quickly sensed that Achilles was hiding in the shadow of the corner, although that shadow looked no different from other shadows. I didn't expect you to make a move during the day, Hobert said. In fact, Hobert and Achilles had already competed when Hobert was giving money and asking for Elizabeth's jewelry, but that was a competition of aura. Although Hobert's sequence was lower than Achilles, his aura was not weak. Achilles was unprepared at the time and found no obvious weaknesses, so he did not make a move. Hobert thought the other party would escape, or wait for the official Beander to come to them, preparing to fight the official Beander. He never expected the other party to use the divination results to arrive at this villa beforehand and ambush him. If it were someone else, I would choose to hide, Achilles said, but you are different. He said, Haman of Backland just hid with me for a while. I saw your appearance in his memories, and I know you disrupted the organization's plan. So, I came here in advance, ready to kill you. He had been observing Hobert just now, and only after he discovered that Hobert was a sequence 8 inches barbarian, did he decide to act. Hobert no longer hesitated, grabbing the teleportation statue from the stone box and first moving Elizabeth outside the villa. But the shadow in the corner stood up like a piece of black cloth, and a hand stretched out from within the shadow, making a pinching motion towards Elizabeth outside. Elizabeth immediately felt as if a hand was gripping her neck, and in her panic, she reached up to grab her fair neck. But there was nothing on her neck, only a red pinch mark gradually appearing. Hobert quickly moved Elizabeth behind him again. Elizabeth, sitting on the chair, was completely bewildered. What just happened? She seemed to have suddenly arrived on the lawn outside the villa, and then suddenly returned to the second floor. Hobert was not in a hurry to make a move, he was observing Achilles' abilities. He knew the abilities of the Secret Supplicant Pathway's initial sequence and the Sequence 5 Shepherd, and he also roughly knew the Rose Bishop's abilities, but he only had a vague concept of the Hermit's and Listener's abilities. Additionally, Hobert realized that Achilles' abilities seemed to somewhat counter the Barbarians, and as far as Hobert's current abilities were concerned, all he could offer was brute strength. However, no matter how great his strength, it seemed he couldn't hit Achilles, who was hidden in the shadows. If it were any other Sequence 8, encountering such an enemy would almost certainly mean being at their mercy. But Hobert wasn't afraid at all. He had a sealed artifact, 3 magical items, and 1 disposable magical item on him, so even if he couldn't win, self-preservation was not a problem at all. Elizabeth still didn't understand what had just happened, but she could sense that there was a huge danger lurking in this room. And the figure standing in front of her was blocking that danger. Achilles in the shadows hadn't expected Hobert to possess a sealed artifact that allowed for instantaneous teleportation, but since he had already made his move, he naturally couldn't give up halfway. He reached out to Hobert, and Hobert immediately felt a sense of suffocation. When Achilles had tried to strangle Elizabeth's neck earlier, Hobert hadn't understood what was happening, but now that Achilles was trying to strangle him, he roughly understood. Tilting his head, Hobert indeed saw his own shadow's neck being gripped by a shadowy hand. He strained his neck, and 2 veins bulged, causing Achilles to immediately lose his grip. Hobert smiled, wondering if this was the miracle of great strength. He also roughly understood Achilles' main abilities, although Achilles could hide in the shadows and attack enemies by influencing their shadows. However, Achilles' attack power was not strong, and when encountering a Beander like Hobert, who had tough skin and thick flesh, his attacks would not be effective for a while. Thinking of this, Hobert decided to counterattack. He took a large stride forward, wanting to knock down the wall near the window that was already showing signs of collapse, thereby reducing the area of shadow in the room. But his feet seemed to be stuck to the ground. With every step he took, the shadow on the ground was wrestling with him. Hobert even had the illusion that every time he lifted his leg, there was a person hanging from it. After walking 3 or 4 steps, the shadow in the corner flickered, as if breathing heavily. It was only then that Achilles understood. Hobert was deliberately wrestling with him. Great strength was Hobert's strong suit, so of course he would use his strong suit to exhaust Achilles' stamina. Finding loopholes in the enemy's abilities and leveraging one's own strengths, this was a basic operation for a lawyer. Achilles then realized that the young man in front of him was not as reckless as he had initially appeared. He leapt out of the shadows and stood in front of Hobert. Hobert immediately realized this was the opponent's true form, so he raised his staff and struck. Whoosh! Hobert's swinging staff was caught by a hand covered in black fur. Almost instantly, Achilles underwent a noticeable transformation. His body seemed to be draped in a black curtain, the sunlight was moving further and further away from the room, and the room seemed to suddenly stretch, with the windows and door becoming very, very far from Hobert. Endless darkness descended, and Achilles' power rapidly expanded. The hand covered in thick fur pushed forward. Thump, thump, thump. Hobert retreated 2 steps in a hurry, almost dropping his staff. Achilles' transformation continued. His face grew longer and longer, and 2 golden antlers sprouted from his head. Hobert sensed extreme danger and quickly continued to retreat. In just 1 or 2 seconds, Achilles' face was covered in black fur, his head became like a bull's but with golden antlers. He was draped in a black, floor-length robe, and red light flickered in his eyes. Just by standing there, the surroundings were filled with maddening whispers. This was an ability Achilles gained when he was still a whisperer, allowing him to temporarily borrow some power from the Lord's divine kingdom creatures. It was precisely because he established such a connection and yet didn't go mad or die that he became Mr. Z of the Aurora Order. Hobert quickly turned his head away, but he felt that his mind had already been traumatized. All the power of defilement in his spirituality and all the power of madness in his mind were churning within his spirit body, as if he could completely lose his sanity at any moment. This is bad. Elizabeth. Looking at Elizabeth again, the young girl with baby fat on her face was staring intently at the monster in front of her, and two golden horns were slowly growing from her head. Hobert dropped his staff and quickly covered her eyes. And with the teleportation statue in his hand, he forcefully smashed down the two golden horns. Then, Hobert quickly used the teleportation statue's ability to plunge the surrounding 7 to 8 meters into the darkness created by the statue, and stripped Achilles of his vision. There were still unspeakable whispers in his ears, but without the visual impact, the mental burden was much lighter. Elizabeth's eyes gradually regained their luster, and the mutation from before was slowly fading away. Looking at Achilles again, after completing his transformation, he seemed to be able to only stand in place. He slowly opened his bovine-like mouth, as if to utter the most defiled and fallen sound in this world. Madness. This was the ability of the psychological spoon. Hobert had patiently waited until this decisive moment to use the psychological spoon's ability. The bovine-like mouth trembled violently, the two flames in his eyes burned fiercely, and the brain inside the bull's head seemed to be undergoing a baptism of madness. Distortion. Hobert distorted Achilles' thoughts, turning his mental inhibition into wantonness, aiding the madness. Although the sequence 8 feet distortion effect was ordinary, it did have some effect. In fact, Achilles was also undergoing a test of certain mad whispers at this moment. Even though the madness ability came from Hobert, who was only sequence 8, it made him almost lose his sanity, and distortion breached his last mental defense. The hand covered in black fur suddenly lifted and covered his left eye. Ah! With a scream, the tall, black bull-like figure rapidly disappeared. The windows and doors suddenly drew closer, and sunlight once again streamed into the room. The difference was that in the center of the room, Achilles was clutching his left eye, blood flowing from between his fingers. This was the backlash from not controlling that power properly. With his only remaining eye, filled with madness, he shot Hobert a venomous glance. And Hobert, wiping away tears, continued to activate the power of the psychological spoon, madness. Ah! Achilles' body showed clear signs of collapse, and he immediately leapt into the shadows in the corner of the wall. Hobert wanted to continue the pursuit, but tears completely obscured his vision, and an inexpressible sorrow welled up in his heart. Perhaps it was due to using the psychological spoon's ability twice in a row, as even the distortion couldn't completely counteract its negative effects this time. After Archie entered the shadows, his movement speed was incredibly fast. He dragged his body, which showed clear signs of losing control, and quickly disappeared from Hobert's sight. About half a minute later, the sorrow in Hobert's heart gradually faded. Elizabeth seemed to have just woken from a nightmare. "Lawyer, just now, what was that? Why were you crying so sadly?" "It's nothing," Hobert said. "I just recalled some sad things." He looked at Elizabeth helplessly and used his hypnosis ability. "You'd best forget what just happened." Elizabeth forgot her memories after Achilles appeared, and Hobert then soothed her somewhat mad spirit. Using the psychological spoon's ability 3 times in a row made Hobert somewhat tired, and at this moment, Elizabeth couldn't stop laughing. Hobert quickly distorted her laughter. Elizabeth smiled. "Lawyer, you're really strong. You held up such a thick piece of wood with just one hand." Her memory returned to when Hobert had just untied her. Hobert breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm naturally strong. Your 2 good friends are outside, let them take you back first." Elizabeth nodded obediently. She tried to stand up but sat back down in the chair. Lawyer, I have no strength in my legs at all. The creature Achilles transformed into earlier had put immense mental and physical pressure on the ordinary person. Elizabeth, fatigue and powerlessness were normal reactions. However, time was pressing, so Hobert had no choice but to pick Elizabeth up and quickly go downstairs. After a slight surprise, Elizabeth actually found Hobert's embrace made her feel very secure. This thought made her a little shy, and she instinctively tried to move away slightly. The carriage Melissa and Serena were in was circling nearby. After they heard the gunshots, the coachman simply drove the carriage closer, in case Hobert's rescue failed, making it easier for Hobert to escape. When they saw Hobert carrying Elizabeth out, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then Melissa noticed that Elizabeth, in the lawyer's arms, was not very resistant to such intimate contact with this gentleman. After the lawyer placed her in the carriage, she even seemed clearly disappointed. Melissa immediately felt that something was seriously wrong. Klein's rival had appeared. The reason Elizabeth reacted this way was because she felt a deep fear within her. Though she couldn't remember why she was afraid, she only felt safe when Hobert was by her side. First, send the 3 young ladies back, Hobert told the coachman. Elizabeth needs rest now. Also, please report to the police that all the kidnappers have been caught. I don't think they'll be able to run away for a while. Those thugs were either dead or crippled. When he went downstairs just now, those who had fallen unconscious hadn't woken up, and those who hadn't were lying on the ground wailing and unable to move. The coachman asked, Sir, what about you? I have some other matters. After you drop the 3 young ladies off at Dominic's company, wait for me at the Black Knight Goddess Church. Having said that, Hobert quickly walked towards the more crowded street to find a hired carriage. Elizabeth stared blankly at Hobert's receding figure. Why did that back seem so familiar? Elizabeth, are you all right? Serena asked. Elizabeth came back to her senses. Praise the goddess. I was rescued before the kidnappers even finished writing the ransom note. As she spoke, her tears flowed uncontrollably. I was so scared when I was kidnapped, I even thought. At this moment, the fright and grievances Elizabeth had endured welled up, and she finally had a chance to cry it out. Fortunately, her 2 good friends, Melissa and Serena, constantly comforted her. On the other side, after Hobert found a hired carriage, he arrived at the Black Knight Goddess Church. He had the carriage drive around the street behind the church, and after searching for a few minutes, he finally found the Blackthorn Security Company. It must be said, their sign was truly inconspicuous, he almost missed it. After paying the fare, Hobert went up the steps and entered the security company. At the front desk was a brown-haired, good-looking girl who seemed to be engrossed in reading a newspaper. Hello, Hobert said. Whoosh. The girl covered the newspaper on the table, but because she covered it somewhat hastily, the item beneath the newspaper was still revealed, a bestseller. Hobert was momentarily confused. Was there a difference between reading a newspaper at work and reading a novel at work? Why hide the novel with a newspaper? Sir, how may I help you? The girl used a smile to cover her earlier panic. Hobert took out his unofficial personnel identification. I need to see your captain. The good-looking girl at the front desk was, of course, Roxanne. Although she had never seen this kind of identification, she recognized the Black Knight holy emblem. Please follow me. Roxanne led the way. Sir, your accent sounds like you're not from around here. Indeed, Hobert followed behind. I'm from Backland. Roxanne turned to look at Hobert. City of Hope. Is the smog there really as bad as the newspapers say? We usually don't read newspapers, Hobert said. Because the fog is too thick, we can't even see the letters on the newspaper in front of us. Roxanne covered her mouth and chuckled. You're very humorous. They arrived at the captain's office, and Dunn, who had heard Roxanne's voice earlier, was already looking towards the door. Captain, this gentleman from Backland has something to discuss with you. In front of Dunn, Roxanne finally showed her professionalism. After inviting Hobert in, she exited and closed the door. Dunn looked at Hobert. May I ask who you are? Hobert looked at the man before him with gray eyes, a receding hairline, and a deep, gentle voice. "Hello, this is my identification." The captain's appearance was a bit rougher than he had imagined. Dunn glanced at the identification. "Welcome, Mr. Hobert." As he spoke, he gestured for him to sit. Sitting opposite Dunn, Hobert said, "While resolving a dispute, I encountered a member of the Aurora Order." Hobert briefly recounted the kidnapping case and his encounter with Achilles. Finally, he said, Achilles already showed clear signs of losing control at the time. According to the characteristics of the secret supplicant pathway, he could easily lose control completely. Even if he doesn't completely lose control, it will take him a long time to suppress the signs of losing control on his body. I believe we should find him and control him before he loses control. Or capture him while he's licking his wounds. Does your team have a diviner? I left clues on him that can be used for divination. Inside the carriage, Hobert observed the 3 team members besides Dunn. One was Klein Moretti, with black hair and brown eyes, and a clear scholarly aura. Another was Leonard Mitchell, with black hair and green eyes, unkempt, and possessing a poetic air. The last one was Frey, with a high nose bridge, a cold and gloomy demeanor, and a pale complexion that made him look unlike a living person. The reason Captain Dunn dispatched 3 team members at once was partly due to the importance he placed on a Sequence 7 enemy, and partly, of course, to guard against Hobert. Even after confirming Hobert's identity by sending a telegram to Backlund, Dunn was clearly still wary of him. This was normal, as they had not fought together and lacked trust. "So, Mr. Hobert," Dunn said, "what was the clue you mentioned earlier that could be used for divination?" Hobert took out his wallet and carefully pulled out a corner of a banknote from inside. "I personally saw him put this banknote into his pocket. After that, he had to reach the ambush location before me, so he shouldn't have had time to take the banknote out. Once he showed signs of losing control, he would have paid even less attention to it. So, I believe that banknote is very likely still on him." The banknote he referred to was, of course, the 5 Sul divination fee he had paid Archie earlier. When he took it out of his wallet, he had secretly torn off a very small corner. Klein placed the small corner in his palm. It wasn't very difficult to find the whole banknote using just a corner of it. Leonard asked with a smile, "What if, what if, and I don't mean to target you." He said, "What if the other party didn't carry the banknote with him? Then I'll take you to the rented room where he performed divination for people," Hobert said. "If we find clues, we'll continue to investigate. If we don't, then the case is closed, and I'm no longer involved." Leonard smiled. "Case closed is my favorite phrase to hear." "All right, we should set off," Dunn interrupted their increasingly off-topic conversation. Klein began to guide the coachman using the divination rod method. Now idle, Hobert looked at the people in the carriage and suddenly felt a bit dazed, as if he had suddenly joined the protagonist team on an adventure. The carriage gradually left the urban area and arrived at the countryside, finally stopping in front of a farmyard with a water wheel. The people in the carriage immediately sensed the dangerous aura from the farmhouse. The horses pulling the carriage breathed restlessly. If not for the coachman's control, they would have long since pulled the carriage away from there. This made Hobert exclaim, how convenient it was to find people and things with a diviner present. As he sighed, he pulled out his gun and warned, "Be careful, the other party seems to have the ability to transform into a creature that radiates madness and fallenness. If you see him about to transform, do not make eye contact with him." Several people nodded and quickly approached the farmyard, soon discovering the bodies of a dog and several chickens in the yard. If there had been people in the farmyard, they would surely be in grave danger by now. Klein performed a divination. The other party is in the farmhouse. There is a certain danger, but it is within an acceptable range. After a quick assessment of the situation, Dunn said, "I'll pull him into a dream. You guys wait 10 odd seconds before going in." "No, I can make him come out," Hobert said, taking out the teleportation statue. Dunn nodded. He had previously doubted Hobert because he didn't believe a Sequence 8 could severely injure a Sequence 7. Seeing that Hobert had a sealed artifact, Hobert's previous words became more credible. Then, Dunn leaned against a tree outside the courtyard wall, lowered his head, as if falling asleep. Soon, a tranquil aura emanated from his entire body. Oh ah! A painful cry came from the farmhouse, along with the sound of something being knocked over, but soon, it became quiet inside. Hobert held up the teleportation statue. Get ready. Klein and Leonard exchanged glances, ready for what? Hobert began to use the teleportation statue. Everything and everyone within a 15-meter radius was under his control. Immediately afterward, he moved Archie from the farmhouse into the yard. Even at this point, Archie had not completely lost control, he should still retain some sanity. However, his entire body had inflated by a factor of 2, and his body was covered in black, tumor-like structures, one after another. Some of these tumors were shrouded in black mist, others contained turbid liquid. His back, in particular, seemed to have transformed into a thick liquid, and his entire body emitted an aura of filth and fallenness. Several people raised their guns and collectively fired at Archie's deformed head. Hobert sighed again. How good it was to have control-type teammates. If he had encountered such a monster alone, a fierce battle would have been unavoidable. No, he would have been more likely to simply flee and then report it. After a round of concentrated fire, everyone realized something was wrong. Where Archie's head had been shattered, thick black fur was exposed underneath. Dunn suddenly looked up. Damn it, an evil creature is descending by using Archie's body. Just now, Archie was resisting the descent of the evil creature, but Dunn pulling Archie into a dream accelerated the evil creature's descent. At this moment, 2 golden antlers grew from Archie's head. Hobert immediately understood that it was the creature Archie had summoned earlier. Once Archie began to lose control, 2 minotaur antlers, Archie became the vessel for his descent. If this were in the country of disorder, this problem would be easily resolved by simply severing the path of descent. However, in reality, Hobert did not possess this ability. At this point, Dunn also drew his pistol. Kill Archie. Hobert fired along with the others, sighing. Captain Dunn's reaction was very fast. He immediately understood the current situation and quickly thought of a countermeasure. Archie was now the medium for the Minotaur antlers descent. Killing him would also terminate the descent process. Archie, let's call him Archie for now, did not dodge the bullets, but suddenly lay down and twisted his body, rubbing his back. When he got up again, the thick mucus on his back had been wiped away, revealing the thick black fur underneath, as well as human flesh and bones. Those human flesh and bones were gradually being replaced by thick black fur. Dunn lowered his head again, and Archie's movements immediately slowed down. Dunn swayed his body, struggling to resist the other party. Leonard assisted from the side, chanting, "If life deceives you, do not be sad, and do not be troubled. In gloomy days, be calm." A profound stillness fell over the surroundings. Archie's movements slowed down again, and Hobert and Klein almost lost the desire to attack. Hobert, who had been searching for Archie's weakness, finally discovered that there was a patch of human flesh on Archie's back that had never grown thick black fur. He fired 2 shots, tearing away that flesh, and saw black ribs inside. More of the black mist on Archie's body was converging on that rib. Archie was already on the verge of losing control. The extraordinary characteristic on his body had begun to concentrate in one place. That black rib should contain most of his extraordinary characteristic, and it was also the key to this descent. "Cover me." Saying this, Hobert jumped into the yard. Achilles seemed to sense Hobert's intention. He struggled fiercely, and the thick black fur covered the human flesh even faster. Leonard chanted again, "Then you will know why you, still in your prime, lie sleeping in the tomb." Achilles' movements slowed down again. Hobert, having crossed the courtyard wall, put away the teleportation statue and approached Achilles. This immediately made him feel a clear discomfort, as if he heard unnameable whispers again and saw the most defiled and fallen things in the world. He resisted these discomforts with his spirituality, using his cane as a crowbar to pry open part of the flesh on Achilles' back, fully exposing the black rib. Achilles slowly opened his mouth, which was already nearly like an ox's. Oh no! This guy is about to curse. It was too late to stop him now. Hobert prepared to take out the teleportation statue to move it a greater distance, to reduce the damage from the fallen words. Just then, a figure leapt past Hobert. It was K. He nimbly avoided Achilles and accurately threw a stone he held into Achilles' mouth, then gave a powerful kick, completely jamming Achilles' mouth and tongue. Who said he was K the coward? He wasn't cowardly at all at the critical moment. Hobert whistled, saying that having an experienced teammate by his side was truly a reassuring thing. He tore a piece of cloth from his trench coat, used it as a pad, and grabbed the black rib. Even with a layer of cloth, Hobert still felt immense mental pressure. He exerted force and broke the black rib off Achilles' body. The moment it broke off, Hobert suddenly seemed to be in a golden yellow grassland, vaguely seeing some giant figures swaying in the distance. The surroundings were pitch black, seemingly containing unspeakable danger. A flash of lightning streaked across, and Hobert saw giants as tall as mountains around him. They wore huge black hoods and rested their hands on great swords planted in front of them. As if sensing something, the giants all turned their heads and looked at Hobert. Hobert felt as if he was greatly infatuated with the powerful strength of these giants, but his willpower ultimately overcame his obsession with power. He turned his head away, and his consciousness returned to the farmyard on the outskirts of Tingen City. Achilles' flesh had already turned into black liquid, leaving only a white skeleton in the courtyard. Part of the skeleton's upper body had transformed into non-human bones. Especially the head, which was similar to an ox's head but had two golden deer antlers. Hobert threw the rib in his hand outside the courtyard. The immense mental pressure disappeared, and the feeling of being able to enter another world at any moment also vanished. He let out a long sigh. After Achilles' loss of control and the descent of the ox-headed deer horns, the rib would be a sealed artifact with significant negative effects. Dunn, from outside the courtyard wall, asked, "How do you feel?" "A bit tired," Hobert said. "It's best to use tongs to hold the rib to avoid direct contact with it." Dunn saw that Hobert's condition was normal and said to Frey, "Go check the farmhouse." Hobert looked at his damaged trench coat and asked Dunn, "Can I get reimbursed?" Everyone looked at Klein together. Klein was stunned. Why did everyone look at him when reimbursement was mentioned? Hobert noticed that the atmosphere was a bit off, so he cleared his throat and said, "According to my cooperation model with the Backland Night Watcher squad, I have the right to share in the spoils of war. Moreover, I made significant contributions in discovering Achilles and fighting Achilles, so I have the priority to choose the spoils. Of course, if the rules in Tingen City are different, we can discuss it further." The last sentence was entirely because the Tingen City Night Watcher squad had a large number of people at the moment, and Hobert was leaving a way out for himself. "Let's follow your agreement with Backland," Dunn said with a smile. "However, since you picked up the spoils, we won't reimburse you for the trench coat." Hobert smiled, "No problem. There were two main spoils of war from this battle. One was the black rib, and the other was the two golden deer antlers. Earlier, the ox-headed deer horns had already descended with much power. After the descent process was interrupted, the previously descended power was completely concentrated on those two golden deer antlers. The black rib might have strange abilities, but it was completely unusable, or the cost of using it was too great. Although it could be crushed and sold for its extraordinary characteristic, considering that Dunn and others were present, a normal Beander would certainly not choose the rib. So Hobert took off his trench coat and wrapped the skull and antlers together. At this moment, Frey came out of the farmhouse. There are two broken bodies inside, and some torn clothes. Frey brought out the clothes, and among them, they found a wallet and a letter. The wallet contained a few crumpled banknotes, one of which was the 5 Sul banknote with a corner torn off by Hobert. According to the contents of the letter, they learned that the monster that had just died was actually Mr. Z of the Aurora Order. This is a huge victory in striking the Aurora Order. Dunn said. Hobert smiled. To celebrate this victory, I'd like to invite everyone to a restaurant gathering tonight. I wonder if you would do me the honor. With a feast to eat, of course I'll go, Leonard was the first to state. Dunn smiled. There's no reason to let the guest pay. We'll use the squad's funds to treat everyone to dinner tonight. I'll send a telegram to Backland once I get back. I think everyone who participated in today's battle will also receive a bonus. However, how Mr. Hobert's bonus will be issued will have to wait until you return and contact the Backland Night Watcher squad. Thus, the dinner gathering was happily decided. Next was cleaning up the battlefield. Not so many people were needed, so Dunn asked Klein to go back and call the police to deal with the 2 bodies in the farmhouse. Hobert rode back with Klein. In the car, Klein chatted with Hobert while carefully observing the young lawyer. He always felt that this lawyer seemed somewhat familiar, but he just couldn't remember where he had seen him. As a diviner, Klein's judgment based on his spiritual intuition did not make him think it was his imagination. Instead, it made Klein pay more attention to Hobert's every move. As they were about to get off the car, Hobert smiled at Klein and said, "Thank you for plugging its mouth in time just now. If you ever come to Backland, remember to come to the Oslon Barton law firm to find me. I will definitely treat you well. If you encounter any difficulties in Backland, you must come to me. I have some connections in Backland." Klein smiled and thought to himself, he says it as if I would go to Backland. He smiled and said, "Your bravery was also impressive. If you hadn't jumped into the courtyard first, I wouldn't have been willing to go in." Hobert said with a double meaning, "I am a barbarian." Klein was stunned. After Hobert finished speaking, while the carriage was still moving, he naturally opened the door and got out, holding his trench coat made into a pouch. Klein quickly went to the carriage door and saw Hobert already standing on the street, waving at him. He mumbled, "Do barbarians just not care about what others think of them? There's one more chapter today." Hobert got off here because he saw the carriage Ulysses had assigned to him, not far from the Black Knight Goddess Church. After the coachman saw Hobert, he said, "Sir, Sheriff Jared and Dominic, who are in charge of this case, both wish for you to come over." Jared had asked the coachman about Hobert's whereabouts, and the coachman, being very professional, said he did not know, otherwise Jared would have followed him directly. "Let's go back to the villa first," Hobert sighed, "I haven't had lunch yet." The coachman nodded and sent Hobert back to the villa. While the kitchen was preparing lunch, he returned to his room and had the male servant outside the door guard it, allowing no one to enter. After locking the door, Hobert used his self-sacrifice method to send the golden antlers into the country of disorder. Although he still did not know the use of the golden antlers, theoretically, these 2 antlers should be very rare extraordinary materials. He would first leave them in the country of disorder and then find a way to monetize them after the fuss died down. Then Hobert comfortably took a bath, changed his clothes, and then went to the dining room to enjoy his late lunch. While eating, Hobert sighed, feeling as if he had grown fond of this life where everything was handed to him. Perhaps when playing the corrupted Baron, he could indulge himself appropriately. However, there must be a bottom line, otherwise, once the evil in human nature is released, he himself might not be able to control it. After lunch, Hobert asked the coachman to take him to Dominic's company again. Dominic was naturally extremely grateful to Hobert. At that time, he was still negotiating the details of the employment contract with Ahova Security Company, and Elizabeth had already been rescued. Then Dominic continued, "Jared has been waiting for you in the reception room. Although the death of 2 bandits is a bit troublesome, rest assured, I will help you hire the best lawyer to clear your name. Also, if you mention that you are a friend of Ulysses later, even if he wants to arrest you, he will treat you politely." Hobert smiled and said, "Mr. Dominic, I have no intention of reporting to prison, because I have an appointment tonight." Dominic did not react for a moment. "Because you have an appointment tonight, you do not intend to cooperate with the investigation." "Please take me to see Sheriff Jared," Hobert asked as he walked out. "How is Elizabeth?" "Thank goodness, she was only a little frightened. The two arrived at the reception room while talking. Jared had already drunk 2 pots of coffee, but he had to wait here. After all, Hobert had caused 2 deaths and several injuries that morning, which was a major case. "I'm arresting you immediately." "Hobert!" Jared shouted as soon as he saw Hobert. "You killed 2 citizens of Tingen City at noon." "Sheriff Jared, right. Please tell me, were all citizens of Tingen City kidnappers?" Hobert questioned with one hand in his pocket. "Are you protecting the rights of legal citizens? Or are you protecting the rights of kidnappers?" Jared was suddenly stunned. Faced with Hobert's questioning, he did not know how to answer for a moment. "I stopped an ongoing crime," Hobert said. "The 2 dead kidnappers were preparing to murder me at the time, which also constitutes an ongoing crime. My actions were self-defense, and not excessive self-defense. But people died." Jared's momentum immediately weakened. "Mr. Sheriff, I understand the criminal law better than you. Cooperating with your investigation is my obligation, but you currently have no right to arrest or interrogate me." This was actually another loophole in the law. Hobert remembered that in similar cases in the Ad era, he would have been held in a detention center pending the investigation results, but the criminal law of the Ruined Kingdom did not clearly stipulate whether self-defense suspects should be temporarily detained. Dominic played mediator on the side and also mentioned Hobert's background as a friend of Ulysses, so Jared had no choice but to take a statement there. After taking the statement, Jared also obtained an address where he could find Hobert at any time, and the atmosphere gradually became harmonious. When Jared left, he bid farewell to Hobert and Dominic like old friends. This reminded Hobert of the chameleon. After seeing Jared off, Dominic sneered, "When my daughter was kidnapped, you didn't take it seriously, but when a few kidnappers died, you came to accuse us." Hobert, on the other hand, sighed, feeling that in this kingdom where personal equality did not exist, such farces might be enacted every day. If he were an ordinary person without legal knowledge, he would certainly have been taken away by Jared, and who knew if he would be severely extorted for bail money during the interrogation for saying something wrong. Dominia invited Hobert to dinner at her home to express their family's gratitude, but she did not expect that Hobert had appointments tonight and tomorrow night, so the time for this invitation had to be postponed. Around 5:30 p.m., Hobert arrived at the restaurant for the gathering. In addition to those who participated in the operation today, 3 other team members also attended, but no clerical staff came. Leonard smiled and said, "Old Neil probably didn't realize that his leave today made him miss a big meal." Leave. Hobert instinctively felt something was wrong. He did not know if Kay had reminded Dunn that Old Neil was conducting a ritual involving an evil god. If Old Neil's ritual was not completely destroyed, he would still have the possibility of losing control. Klein, who was nearby, seemed to have thought of something crucial to remind the captain, but he could not recall what it was for a moment. Just as he was about to use his diviner's spirituality to help himself remember, Captain Dunn suddenly started talking to him about the mental hospital, and because this was an operation to be carried out tonight, he listened with extra seriousness, his earlier thought pushed aside. Leonard on that side explained to Hobert, "Old Neil is also a member of our squad, but his stomach seems to have been a bit uncomfortable these past few days." Hobert nodded and started talking about other topics. When everyone learned that Dai Li, who was once a member of the Tingen City Night Watcher squad, was Hobert's superior, they became a bit closer to Hobert. Halfway through dinner, Hobert noticed that Klein first paused, then went to the washroom. He could not help but chuckle. That's how the Lord of the Washroom came to be. While chatting idly with Leonard, with whom he got along well, Hobert's mind wandered, wondering who was looking for Klein. He recalled and realized that tonight seemed to be the death of the great pirate Keelingers. "I encountered someone suspected to be Keelingers at Duke Negan's ball. He was disguised as Baron Grimir, his purpose unknown. This was Miss Justice's prayer." Klein sat on the ancient high-backed chair, making many conjectures about Keelingers' purpose based on the information Miss Justice provided. He first responded to Miss Justice, "I understand." Then he materialized the scene and sound of Miss Justice's prayer just now and cast it into the deep crimson star that symbolized the hanged man. Tonight is destined to be an extraordinary night for Backlund. Klein sighed with emotion, then wondered what kind of changes his recent actions would bring. But Klein quickly stopped his conjectures. He returned to the washroom and wrote a letter to Mr. Azek with the paper and pen he carried, informing him of Keelinger's appearance at the ball. He then blew the copper whistle to summon the giant bone messenger and sent the letter out. Only after finishing all this did Klein remember that he had only eaten half of his steak. He wondered if the detour to the washroom would affect his appetite. Backlund, St. Wind Cathedral. Alger was first surprised by Audrey's message. He instinctively pressed his hand to his chest and praised the fool. Then Alger's pupils constricted slightly, feeling the power of the fool once again. This was St. Wind Cathedral. It was once the headquarters of the Storm Church, and to this day, it remains one of the holy sites of the Storm Church. Yet, the fool still descended silently and gave a response. After more than 10 seconds of silence, Alger finally controlled his emotions. He turned and went out to report this crucial news to his superiors. After Audrey discovered what might be Keelinger's trace and informed the fool through prayer, she did not passively wait. Instead, she subtly informed her father, Count Hall, about the matter. Thus, Keelinger's assassination attempt failed without surprise. Keelinger's did not entangle himself, he chose to escape immediately and quickly shook off his pursuers using his wind-blessed abilities. At this point, Keelinger's finally had time to wonder where the mistake had occurred. Why was Duke Negan on guard? Suddenly, he remembered the large tree he encountered a few days ago in Backlund's East District, and the 3 people, 1 man and 2 women, who had been hiding behind the tree. It must have been them. Keelinger's realized that the man had recognized him at the time, but he had deliberately acted as if he had mistaken him for someone else, causing Keelinger's to lower his guard. He hadn't risked killing them to silence them. It was precisely because of these 3 people that the cautious Keelinger's moved his assassination attempt forward. He decided to find these 3 people. A wicked smile appeared at the corner of Keelinger's mouth. They couldn't always be protected by Duke Negan or official Beyonders. As long as they lost their protection, he would definitely retaliate against their betrayal in the most cruel way. Just as he thought of this, Keelinger's vision suddenly blurred. He saw various colors in the darkness become extraordinarily rich. In the high sky where the crimson moon was obscured, there were countless indescribable shadows and glows containing mysterious knowledge. Damn it, Keelinger's realized that he had once again fallen into an ambush, and the strength of the ambushers this time was definitely not low. Before he could react, huge skeletons with burning black flames in their eye sockets appeared one after another in front of him, more than 100 of them. And directly below, the dark water surface rose higher and higher, and pale, illusory hands grew out, constantly waving upwards, grabbing Keelinger's feet. Keelinger's hadn't even had time to find any place to break through before he was caught in the dark water. He struggled desperately but watched in despair as the giant skeletons surrounded him. Almost instantly, Keelinger's perceived that his life force was rapidly disappearing. Alger, the first to arrive at the scene, was stunned by the sight before him. Keelinger's was already lifeless. When everyone approached, Keelinger's face rapidly decayed, oozing yellowish-green pus, and flesh fell off piece by piece. With a cracking sound, Keelinger's completely disintegrated, leaving only a pile of white bones. Keelinger's, one of the 7 pirate generals, died so strangely in front of Alger. At this moment, Singer of God, Ace Snake asked in a magnetic voice, "Did you tell anyone else about this intelligence?" Alger immediately regained his composure. "I reported it to you, Archbishop, as soon as I received the intelligence." Ace turned his head and continued to look for clues. Alger, however, was suddenly startled. He thought of a possibility. The Fool's Deer was the one who took action. Only members and subordinates of the Tarot Club could receive intelligence at the first opportunity. And the Fool's Deer happened to be in Backlund, so he, just happened, to help. Inside Duke Negan's mansion, after Audrey learned that Keelinger's was killed by a secret organization, she immediately guessed that the Fool's Deer had dealt with this pirate general. Next, a second surprise awaited Audrey. She received Keelinger's bounty, as well as a gift from Duke Negan to express his gratitude, totaling about £40,000. It was a pity that this money could not be directly used, otherwise Audrey would have been ready to trade for the £20,000 of information with Mr. Emperor at the next Tarot Club meeting. After 9 p.m., after dinner, Hobert and others bid each other farewell. During the banquet, Hobert and Leonard had a very congenial conversation and even exchanged contact addresses when they parted. It was already past 10 p.m. when Hobert returned to the villa. Although he was physically and mentally exhausted, Hobert was somewhat sleepless. This was a strange phenomenon. Sometimes, the more tired one was, the harder it was to fall asleep. Since he couldn't sleep, Hobert began his daily self-reflection. First, in today's battle, he felt the effect of control-type Beyonder abilities. Because Dunn and Leonard were present, the battle in the farmyard at noon seemed to end without much intensity. Of course, Dunn and Leonard's struggle with Achilles in terms of Beyonder abilities was also very intense, but these all happened invisibly, which made it feel less intense. In fact, the ability of the psychological spoon that Hobert possessed was a control-type ability, but it was a magical item, not a sealed artifact. Although magical items and sealed artifacts are one and the same, their methods of use differ. Magical items have little negative effect, and generally speaking, they are not very active, so spiritual energy needs to be infused to activate their abilities. Sealed artifacts, on the other hand, are more active. Even without infusing spiritual energy, they constantly exert influence on creatures near them. Through his use of the psychic necklace and psychological spoon, Hobert summarized some experience in using magical items. The power of magical items is greatly related to the wielder's sequence and the magical item's level. For example, Sequence 8 Hobert could unleash almost the full power of the psychic necklace, whereas when he was Sequence 9, using the psychic necklace for psychometry was still very strenuous. Of course, it's not that the higher the sequence, the more powerful the magical item's ability. The upper limit of a magical item is its own level. For example, the psychic necklace only has a Sequence 7 level at most, and the psychological spoon only has a Sequence 6 level at most. However, Hobert is currently unable to unleash the full power of the psychological spoon. He believes that after advancing to Sequence 7, he will be able to control enemies to a certain extent using the hypnosis of the psychological spoon. Instead of being unable to unleash the true power of madness and hypnosis, as he is now. This made Hobert even more enthusiastic about advancing to Sequence 7. Hobert's thoughts wandered, and he began to summarize his previous battle with Keelingers. He suddenly realized that he now had a sealed artifact and 3 magical items, but he was still missing a magical item that could help him escape. Hobert thought that if he had a sealed artifact or magical item with the travel ability at that time, he could have happily traveled hand in hand with Furs and Zeo, and no one would have stayed there to fight Keelingers to the death. However, magical items with the travel ability corresponded to Sequence 5. The key was that a Sequence 5 of the Apprentice pathway was notoriously difficult to kill. Such a magical item would probably be hard to buy even for £10,000. Hobert sighed, having just felt that he was not short of money a while ago, only to now realize that his more than £900 were indeed quite a lot for an ordinary person, but for a Beyonder, this amount of money was not enough for anything. Thus, Hobert regained his enthusiasm for making money. He planned to frequently check the information wall at the Mercenary Club for suitable commissions once he returned to Backland. As he thought, sleepiness gradually crept in, and Hobert finally fell asleep, but because his spirit had been impacted during his battle with Achilles today, he kept dreaming after falling asleep. South Continent, no existence town. The morning sunlight pierced through the mist, shining into the council hall on the mountainside, bringing a touch of warmth to the room. The patriarch and several family elders sat like wooden carvings in their seats. The demigod elder, Chester, broke the silence. So, that hidden existence possesses at least angelic level power. Calvin said, from what we can see, yes. That hidden existence interrupted the enemy angel's descending power. Elder Bowen speculated, could it be that Elliot found some loophole? At this point, he realized it was impossible himself, even if a loophole in the opponent's descending power was found, without sufficient authority, it would be difficult to push the opponent's power back. No, Calvin said, that hidden existence appeared before me and punished me. Elliot said, do not test God. The council hall fell silent again. If they had an angel level, or rather, a God level expert backing them, they wouldn't need to always hide in no existence town. It was also due to insufficient intelligence back then that the family provoked the Rose School, only to later learn that this organization actually had angel level experts. But at the same time, this could also represent a catastrophic disaster. All the family's strength combined might not be a match for that hidden existence. After dozens of seconds, Calvin added, that hidden existence did not let me completely lose control, and he allowed Elliot to complete the spiritualistic process. This is clearly a response to our probe, and it shows sufficient goodwill. No matter how we choose, this hidden existence has already noticed us, the patriarch said in a hoarse voice. Then, why don't we try to contact this hidden existence? There was another period of silence, but this time it was different from the previous silence. It meant that everyone tacitly agreed to the patriarch's proposal. How should we contact that hidden existence? Bowen asked. Calvin, who was already prepared, said, for example, give Elliot an elder's seat. Hobert yawned and got up to wash. Although he had dreamed all night, his spirituality and physical strength had recovered very well. While enjoying breakfast, he saw the headline on the freshly delivered morning paper, which was the news of Keelinger's death. Last night was indeed the day Keelingers sought his own death, and also a day of great harvest for Audrey. Hobert glanced at the other contents on the newspaper, finding nothing worth noting, so he focused on his meal. After breakfast, Hobert once again went to Dominic's company. Dominic smiled happily. Hobert, I was just about to send someone to invite you over. It turned out that yesterday, a kidnapper injured by Hobert accidentally blurted out during interrogation that their kidnapping had a mastermind behind it. The police used this as a breakthrough to interrogate and find out that the mastermind was Claude. This morning, Claude had already been arrested and imprisoned. Dominic had just received news that Claude admitted he had planned this kidnapping. So, Dominic and Claude's lawsuit would not need to be fought, the prosecution would prosecute Claude. Naturally, there was nothing for Hobert to do. However, Dominic was still very generous, paying a £150 lawyer's commission and giving Hobert an additional £30 tip to express his gratitude for Hobert saving Elizabeth. Hobert also did not expect this case to conclude in such a way. Dominic smiled. Tonight I will also attend Ulysses's welcome banquet for you. Elizabeth will also be there. She has been saying she wants to thank you in person. You're too kind, Hobert smiled. It is my honor for you to attend the banquet tonight. In the morning, the Blackthorn Security Company received a new commission, to track Mrs. Sharon and find evidence of her crimes. Captain Dunn handed this commission to Klein. Under Leonard's guidance, Klein went to the Hound Bar, found a gang leader, and spent £5 to ask him to send his subordinates to monitor Mrs. Sharon in shifts and record her daily activities. Fortunately, this expense could be reimbursed. Klein walked out of the Hound Bar with a sigh, suddenly remembering that old Neil's home was not far from here, and old Neil had been on leave for 2 consecutive days, supposedly going to see a doctor today. Klein took out his pocket watch and checked the time. It was almost 11 o'clock. He wondered if old Neil had returned from the hospital yet. Since he was already here, Klein decided to visit old Neil. After walking for about 20 minutes, he arrived outside old Neil's house. Klein's spirituality detected something amiss. The sun was already high in the sky, but old Neil's house still had its curtains and door curtains drawn. Had old Neil's condition worsened? Klein quickly stepped forward and knocked on the door, but no one answered. However, there seemed to be someone whispering inside. Old Neil. Klein called out, but still no one answered, though the whispering continued. Could old Neil's condition be so severe that he couldn't get up to open the door? Klein took out a piece of paper he carried with him, shook his wrist, and the paper immediately became as hard as steel. He inserted the thin, steel paper into the door to open the bolt. Pushing the door open, he immediately saw old Neil pacing step by step in the darkness. Klein did not immediately go forward, because he noticed that old Neil seemed to be circling an altar. Thump! The door suddenly closed by itself, and the candles on the altar next to old Neil lit up brightly like spitting fire. The firelight allowed Klein to clearly see old Neil. An emotionless eye had appeared on each of his cheeks. Klein immediately realized that old Neil was once again on the verge of losing control, and the situation was even more serious than last time. Besides his two emotionless eyes, old Neil's face was covered in wrinkles, and his hair was sparse, making him seem to have aged more than a decade in an instant. His fingernails were long, as if they hadn't been trimmed in years, which made him look like a zombie crawled out of a graveyard. Old Neil didn't notice Klein entering the room. He continued to circle the altar, muttering to himself as if reciting some obscure and difficult to understand incantation. On the altar was a large vat of blood, and in the center of the altar was a symbol Klein had never seen before, an eye surrounded by directional symbols in a circle of multi-sided, multi-angled shapes. Driven by old Neil's incantation, the eye in the center of the altar seemed to become animated, coldly staring at Klein, the intruder. It wasn't Klein's first time dealing with an extraordinary incident. He forced himself to calm down. Old Neil seemed to be just one step away from complete loss of control. He couldn't be provoked at this moment, and it was too late to go back and ask the captain for help. He had to perform the ritual to implore the Black Knight goddess's power immediately. This was old Neil's last chance to be saved. So Klein moved as lightly as possible to old Neil's vicinity. Seeing that old Neil still hadn't noticed him, he began to set up the altar. Everything went smoothly. Just as the altar was set up and Klein was about to implore the goddess's power, the eye on old Neil's cheek suddenly rotated, seemingly noticing the newly completed altar. "Little Klein, please don't disturb me." Old Neil suddenly looked at Klein and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm about to succeed, I'm about to succeed." Klein took a deep breath. "Old Neil, don't be afraid, it won't hurt, it'll be over in a moment." "No." Old Neil's emotions were agitated. "My research hasn't harmed anyone else, it has never harmed anyone else. You don't have a lover, you haven't experienced having a lover die in your arms, you don't know that feeling of pain." Finally, his tone softened again. "Please, I'm about to succeed, don't stop me." Klein felt a pang of softness, but he immediately forced himself to be as hard as iron. "Old Neil, don't you know what you're doing? You are harming yourself, and you will harm others. Please, Old Neil, don't resist, this is your last chance." Old Neil's emotions became agitated again. You don't know how advanced this knowledge is. I overheard it by chance, it came from the hidden sage." Old Neil's expression gradually turned to surprise. No, it's not like this." Another eye appeared on his forehead, slowly opening. Klein knew this was truly the last chance. "I implore the power of the night, I implore." Old Neil, with a ferocious expression, rushed over, intending to destroy the altar Klein had set up. Klein held up his cane to meet the attack. "I implore the power of crimson." Old Neil was incredibly strong. With a sweep of his hand, he directly broke Klein's cane. If Klein hadn't dodged nimbly, he would have been scratched by old Neil's fingernails. Old Neil kicked and destroyed Klein's altar, and the last shred of sanity in his eyes made him stop his attack. "Don't mind me, hurry and go." At this point, he already knew that the power he had obtained came from an evil god, and his condition had become abnormal. But after saying this, the last trace of sanity in old Neil's eyes disappeared, and his skin turned a blood-red color, like fresh blood, as he let out a beast-like roar at Klein. Klein quickly retreated to the door, but he found that the door couldn't be opened at all. Old Neil, already like a man of blood, rushed towards him. Klein used his clown ability to nimbly dodge old Neil's attacks. What to do? Did he really have to shoot old Neil? Klein felt his hand, which was reaching for the gun, was very weak. No, there's still a way. But it's risky. Klein looked at old Neil, his mysticism mentor. If he didn't take this risk now, he would never forgive himself later. After a brief hesitation, Klein chanted, "O the creator of human order. You are the master of the country of disorder. You are the master of the order clock. I implore your gaze and favor." Hobert, who had just returned to the villa from Dominic's place, heard the prayer from the country of disorder. Elliot, or Apton. Anyway, he only had these two believers now, and one of them wasn't very devout. Hobert once again instructed his butler to prohibit anyone from disturbing him. After locking the door, he immediately entered the country of disorder. A new star was flickering in the pool. Who could it be? Hobert extended his spirituality to that star and saw a dim room, a bizarre altar, a blood man attacking, and Klein, who was desperately dodging but seemed not to know how to counterattack. Old Neil. Hobert immediately had a guess. Sure enough, old Neil had lost control again, but it seemed a bit late now. Old Neil's etheric body, astral body, and mental body should have all undergone varying degrees of mutation. But since he had encountered it, he couldn't ignore it. With thoughts swirling, Hobert quickly came up with a treatment plan. He immediately returned to the real world and brought the psychological spoon into the country of disorder by sacrificing it to himself. Time was pressing, so he immediately mobilized the power of the country of disorder and poured it into the star representing K. Klein had prayed 3 times and still saw no reaction. Rosal, you big liar. No. He had to make the final decision. If this continued, he would die here. Just as Klein was forcing himself to make up his mind, a throne, seemingly cast from sharp swords, appeared in midair. A towering and mysterious blurred figure sat on the throne. Then, a surging power descended, enveloping old Neil, who stood rooted to the spot. The mutation on his body rapidly disappeared, and the extra eyes on his face closed almost simultaneously and immediately vanished. This power seemed to represent supreme order. Klein had an epiphany, but merely restoring the order of old Neil's physical body wasn't enough, his mind must also be deranged. Just as he thought of this, Klein felt another surging power. This power made one's heart tremble involuntarily, as if an enormous creature was before them. It was an extraordinary power related to the mind. Klein breathed a sigh of relief. This the Creator seemed to offer, full service, even helping to solve the mental problems of those who lost control. Old Neil returned to his original appearance, but he looked much older than a few days ago. After all this turmoil, he couldn't hold on and fainted to the ground. Thump. Just as Klein was about to go forward to help him, he suddenly heard a sound from the altar. He turned his head and saw that at some point, a black eye had appeared in the center of the altar old Neil had set up. It was alive, and it was jumping into the vat of blood, but its first jump was unsuccessful. Hobert, from the country of disorder, first used the power of order to restore old Neil's body to order, then used the power of the psychological spoon to hide a part of his infected spirit, and used hypnosis to make old Neil forget his ritual and his obsession with resurrecting his lover. Just as Hobert breathed a sigh of relief, marveling at the success of this treatment, he was startled, as if suddenly being watched by an unknown gaze. Hobert felt that the other party's gaze seemed to penetrate true sight, seeing himself on the Iron Throne in the country of disorder. Turning the perspective of true sight, he saw that the eye symbol in the center of the altar suddenly came to life, transforming into a real eye. It was completely black, with deep black pupils, making it look like a moving dark paper cut. It hopped and hopped, trying to jump into the blood-filled basin on the altar. Hobert roughly understood what was happening. Old Neil's ritual had indeed attracted some high-level attention, but old Neil's ritual had not yet been completed, so the existence watching here could not project too much power into this place. Thus, that eye hoped to jump into the blood-filled basin to strengthen its own power. I cannot let the other party succeed, Hobert realized. If the power of this eye becomes greater, the existence behind it might truly see the situation in the country of disorder through true sight. So Hobert, with a supreme voice, said to K, "Sacrifice it to me." At the same time, he threw the symbol representing the creator into K's starlight. At this moment, Klein, in old Neil's room, deeply experienced what it meant to invited God easily, but send them away with difficulty. The creator had indeed healed old Neil's loss of control, as Rosal had said, but he seemed to have no intention of leaving. What to do? Finally, the other party said he wanted that hopping eye, and Klein breathed a sigh of relief. That would be best. While giving the creator a sacrifice, it also dealt with that strange eye. Klein quickly drew the symbol representing the creator near the strange eye, set up an altar, and then performed the sacrifice using the knowledge of sacrifice he had just obtained from Little Sun. He saw two colossal bronze gates open a narrow slit, and a surging power emerged, immediately forming a huge suction force, as if to pull everything in the room into the bronze gates. When the enormous suction disappeared, the bronze gates also vanished, the hopping eye on the altar was nowhere to be seen, and the creator in midair also disappeared. Klein let out a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, this mysterious existence truly had no ill intentions and did not demand an unbearable sacrifice. As he thought, he tidied up the altar, then went to pull back the curtains. The dazzling sunlight poured into the room, leaving no place for darkness to hide. In the rented house in the suburbs of Tingen City, Zangwill crossed out a paragraph in his notebook, then wrote furiously, "Klein Moretti was almost killed by the out-of-control old Neil. Why didn't he draw his gun and shoot after a psychological struggle? If he had drawn his gun and shot, old Neil would have become the sacrifice for this ritual, and Klein Moretti would have immediately lost control due to the gaze of a hidden existence, turning into a monster piled with flesh and bones. But he didn't do that. Not only that, he even restored old Neil, who was on the verge of losing control, to normal. This is truly incredible. He has once again surprised Zangwill, and even the quill in his hand doesn't understand what exactly happened. In any case, Zangwill's plan to kill Klein Moretti has once again fallen through. He has once again been toyed with by a Sequence 8, which makes him extremely angry. Zangwill lifted his pen, a hint of anger flashing in his eyes. It wasn't because of Klein, but because he had just been mocked by a pen, and that pen was in his hand. Hobert, in the country of disorder, examined the eye in his hand. It still possessed the characteristics of being alive, but it looked left and right, as if it had lost its target and didn't know what to do. This indicated that the country of disorder had severed its connection with its main body. Hobert tried to grasp the eye, and his gaze suddenly extended to an unknown land. That land seemed to be an endless wilderness, with a tall tower in the midst of desolation. Atop the tower was an eyeball made of flames, watching over this land. Suddenly, that eyeball seemed to sense Hobert's gaze, and it looked at Hobert. Hobert's perspective immediately returned to the country of disorder. At that moment, he felt a surge of knowledge appearing in his mind. Pop! His head exploded like a crushed tomato, shaking the half-built hall, and the pool in front of the iron throne boiled like water, bubbling incessantly. After about 4 or 5 seconds, Hobert's head regrew, and the hall and pool returned to their original state. Hobert gave a wry smile, having courted death unexpectedly. Immediately after, he found a large amount of chaotic and disorganized knowledge appearing in his mind. He didn't even understand the meaning of most of the knowledge. However, it seemed that those things were knowledge itself, and it seemed possible to use them to understand the mysterious world, but such understanding could only happen after seeing it. For example, if he saw the spirit world, then the knowledge itself about the spirit world would jump out, and Hobert would immediately understand the composition of the spirit world, the principles behind the rules of walking in the spirit world, and so on. No wonder Beyonders of the Seer pathway were so afraid of being chased by the hidden sage who injected knowledge into their minds. Is this knowledge useful? Very useful, but generally not needed, difficult to understand, and takes up too much memory. If he had held this eye in the real world, there was no doubt that Hobert would have already lost control and turned into a monster. Hobert materialized a stone box, placed the left and right looking eye into the box, and covered it with the power of order. Then Hobert began to sort through the understandable knowledge. Sequence 9 Seer Potion Formula. Main ingredients: a pair of eyes from a Nazra ancient mountain giant ape, 70 grams of star crystal. Auxiliary ingredients: 80 milliliters of pure water, 8 drops of octagonal golden plate flower juice, 7 grams of white orchid powder, 9 grams of dragon blood grass. Sequence 9 Erudite Potion Formula. Main ingredients: head of a brown-backed firefly, a complete 5-colored coleus plant. Auxiliary ingredients: Sequence 8 Combat Scholar Potion Formula. Main ingredients: a complete battle jewel beetle, a dried slipper orchid flower. Auxiliary ingredients: Sequence 7 Wizard Potion Formula. Main ingredients: the complete brain of a pale long-necked beast, 2 fruits of the fleabane tree. Auxiliary ingredients: the last piece of mystical knowledge Hobert obtained was the promotion ritual for Sequence 5 Feet Astrologer. Ride on the back of a colorful star-eyed beast and drink the potion under the midnight sky. He immediately felt that the explosion of his head just now was worth it, as it allowed him to master the continuous sequence potion formulas for the seer pathway, as well as the starting pathway formula for the erudite. By now, Hobert had mastered continuous potion formulas for 4 pathways. Although they were all sequence 6 to sequence 9 potion formulas, such an accumulation would one day be of great use. Selling these potion formulas was their most minor value. Then Hobert thought of the scene he had just seen using the black eyeball. The eye in the wilderness did not seem to be the hidden sage. Could it be the knowledge more? He remembered that the hidden sage seemed to be the activated unique characteristic of the hermit pathway. Now the knowledge more also possessed its own consciousness. And it could already project its power through certain rituals. Old Neil's ritual was told to him by the hidden sage. Could this be the hidden sage's effort to find the knowledge more? It seemed that the seals on the west continent had indeed loosened. Subsequently, Hobert also thought that his gains in Tingen City were very strange. Besides the eye he gained today, there were also 2 golden antlers. They all looked quite high grade, but he dared not use them in reality. Once used, he would either die or go mad, and they were also difficult to monetize. They could only be temporarily stored in the country of disorder, to see if they would be of any use in the future. Hobert, whose spirituality was showing signs of exhaustion, left the country of disorder. The after effects of his head, exploding, just now carried over into reality. His head throbbed with pain for over 10 minutes before his spirituality began to recover, and the headache gradually disappeared. Today's death-seeking experience made him just want to lie in bed and not move at all. Suddenly, he saw the majestic giant palace, and a mysterious, towering figure sitting on a high-backed chair said, "Next week's gathering is cancelled." Hobert abruptly sat up, then slowly lay back down. It seemed that Mr. Fool had already sensed something. In the evening, the butler reminded Hobert that the guests invited by Mr. Ulysses had arrived. After spending half the day in a lazy state, Hobert washed his face, adjusted his demeanor, and changed into the formal attire he had brought before heading to the living room. First to arrive was Mr. Dominic's family. His wife, who was Ulysses's sister and a baroness, expressed her gratitude to Hobert. Although Elizabeth had forgotten the details of Hobert's battle with Achilles, when she saw Hobert, she immediately felt an unprecedented sense of security. She sat beside Hobert. "Mr. Hobert, I heard that the lawsuit you were supposed to handle is no longer necessary." "Yes," Hobert said. "Mr. Claude has already sent himself to prison." He noticed that this somewhat adorable young lady was a bit too close, but moving away would be too impolite, so he sat forward a bit to ease the awkwardness. Elizabeth also followed suit and sat forward a bit. "Then are you going back in a few days?" "In 2 more days," Hobert smiled. "I really can't bear to leave the fresh air of Tingen City." Dominic and his wife exchanged glances. They naturally noticed that their daughter was acting a bit unusual. However, Elizabeth did not make any overly intimate gestures. She seemed content just sitting beside Hobert. Then let's go shopping at the department store together this weekend, Elizabeth said. I want to give you a gift to express my gratitude. There's no need to be so polite, and I might be busy this weekend. What for? Participating in the operation to save Tingen City. The family of three all thought Hobert was joking and laughed along very supportively. At this moment, the true owner of the villa, Ulysses, entered. I heard someone dared to kidnap our little princess. In front of Elizabeth, Ulysses finally revealed his true, less rigid smile, showing his deep affection for his niece. Yes, uncle, Elizabeth went to greet him. But the kidnappers hadn't even finished writing the ransom note when Mr. Hobert rescued me. Hobert smiled. This shows that the kidnappers really aren't well educated. They probably have to consult a dictionary to write a ransom note and would be frustrated by grammar issues. Everyone's minds immediately conjured the image of the kidnappers consulting a dictionary while writing the ransom note with a bitter expression, which made everyone burst into laughter. Then guests arrived one after another, all dressed in military uniforms, shouting as they entered, "Where is Commander Christine's son?" Commander Christine's son, why does he look a bit like Commander Rex? Nonsense. How can Commander Christine's son, you know what, he really does look a bit like him. Haha, tomorrow I'll write a letter to Commander Christine and report all your faces to him. Someone else asked, Hobert, right. Do you have a girlfriend? Do you want uncle to introduce you to one? If Commander Christine gave some pointers, he'd probably have children by now. They didn't care about Hobert's answers. Even if Hobert said nothing, they probably could have kept talking. Amidst the laughter, the dinner began. Hobert strongly suspected that they hadn't had a gathering in a long time, and the dinner to welcome him to Tingen City was merely an excuse for their get-together. After all, Hobert had been here for several days and was almost ready to leave. At the dinner table, only Hobert and Elizabeth were the younger generation. They still had some common topics and chatted occasionally, which kept Hobert, the protagonist of the dinner, from feeling too awkward. Around 10 in the evening, the guests gradually left the banquet. Ulysses, who had drunk quite a bit, patted Hobert's shoulder. If you have any plans, go ahead and do them without restraint. Don't disappoint the expectations of the two commanders. As long as Commander Christine speaks, we can still charge into battle with him. Hobert smiled helplessly. All right, it's getting late. You should go rest. Watching Ulysses leave, the smile on Hobert's face gradually disappeared. He had almost asked Ulysses for external help just now. Fortunately, he held back, because Ulysses was polite to him out of respect for Christine. Hobert's relationship with Ulysses had not reached that level yet. The final preparations began. On Friday, Hobert went nowhere, staying in the villa to conserve his energy and adjust the evasion times for the negative effects of the sealed artifact and mystical items. On Saturday morning, Hobert took a carriage to the Blackthorn Security Company. He said to the coachman, "You can go back first. Come back to pick me up in the afternoon, around 4 or 5 o'clock." After seeing the coachman off, Hobert looked at the somewhat cloudy sky and stepped into the security company's lobby. In the lobby, Leonard was chatting uncomfortably with a woman wearing a lotus leaf hat and a loose dress. "Hobert," Leonard said, you came." He didn't know whether to say Hobert had come at the right time or not. Seeing Maigao Aosi, who was pregnant with an evil god's offspring, Hobert's thoughts exploded. He recalled everything about 008, and the overall plan he had devised. Firstly, his plan was not complicated, because when facing 008, the more complex the plan, the greater the chance of failure. Last week, Hobert had planned to arrive in Tingen City early to prepare, but he considered for a long time that no matter what preparations he made, 008 would detect something amiss in advance. So, Hobert's plan was to gain the basic trust of Dunn and the others before Ince Zangwil made his move. After that, things weren't so complicated. Maigao Aosi coming to Blackthorn Security Company was already inevitable. Only with this event would there be a basis to deal with Ince. Otherwise, Ince would continue to wait for an opportunity, and the development of events would completely exceed Hobert's control, and he would no longer have the advantage of a god's perspective. The proposition was set: how to stall Mygao Ausi without harm and wait for reinforcements from the cathedral. Hobert's answer was to follow the original course of the story. When they had no choice but to engage Mygao Ausi, they had to protect Leonard during her first wave of attacks. The old man inside Leonard, as well as the sealed artifact he held, could more effectively stall Mygao Ausi. In the subsequent battle, he would prevent Dun from fighting desperately. If absolutely necessary, he would throw Saint Selena's ashes onto the street outside, letting whoever wanted it take it. As for K, his life or death could be completely ignored. Additionally, the principle for participating in this operation was, just do your best, don't fight to the death. He didn't have K's ability to resurrect. Hobert, standing in the Blackthorn Security Company, had his thoughts racing for a moment. He quickly put on a smile and said to Leonard, "I came to say goodbye today, but it seems I came at the wrong time." Leonard smiled bitterly. "I still have guests here. The captain and Klein are in the back." Hobert nodded. "Okay, you go ahead and be busy. The baby in my belly says he seems to have seen this gentleman somewhere," Mygao Ausi suddenly said. Hobert smiled. "Perhaps we were good friends in our previous lives." "No, he said you were the order that spied on his kingdom," Mygao Ausi said, "but he didn't expect you to be so weak." Hobert recalled that when he obtained that black rib a few days ago, he seemed to have seen the situation of another world. He estimated that it was probably a place like the true Creator's divine kingdom. This meant that Zachary, the secret supplicant he had encountered before, had one of his eyes polluted because he saw the true Creator's divine kingdom during a ritual. Thinking of this, Hobert smiled. "Madam, please rest assured and take care of your pregnancy." A child's words are inherently incoherent. Mygao Ausi smiled gently. "No, my child is very smart. If he says you are weak, then you are truly weak." Hobert twitched the corner of his mouth. The true Creator wouldn't change paths to become a hunter, would he? After a slight nod to Mygao Ausi, Hobert turned to the back of the reception hall. Dun and Klein were already waiting there, one holding an urn exuding a sense of tranquility, and the other clutching a pale, thick blood vessel. Klein smiled bitterly. "Hobert, you really came at the wrong time." "No, I think it's precisely the right time," Hobert said seriously. "When I was in Backland, I heard that Tingen City seemed to be brewing a huge disaster. Now I know what this disaster is." He asked, "Have there been a lot of coincidences happening recently?" Dun and Klein's expressions both froze. In their recent discussion, they had just talked about the coincidences happening lately. Hobert said, "Please send a telegram to the cathedral, saying that 008 has planned a ritual for the descent of an evil god, and ask them to send a saint for support." Upon hearing 008, Dun and Klein immediately thought of the renegade in Zangwil. They each had their own conjectures and generally understood what was going on. Dun, holding the urn, said, "I'll go send the telegram immediately. Don't act rashly before I return." Hobert glanced outside. "Don't rush, there's still time." Klein said, "You are quite calm." "Of course," Hobert smiled. "The more critical the moment, the calmer one must be." In a bar outside Blackthorn Security Company, the one-eyed Ince Zangwil ordered a beer and held a quill pen, letting it write on its own. Hobert Jeffrey's arrival was not part of Ince Zangwil's plan. Will he affect the entire plan? Ince took a sip of beer, gripped the quill tightly, and wrote, "No, after all, he is only a sequence 8. Then he relaxed his wrist, again allowing the quill to write on its own. Hobert Jeffrey possesses much unexpected knowledge. He has already guessed that Mygao Ausi's arrival is part of Ince Zangwil's plan. Will he affect the entire plan? Ince's one eye narrowed. Klein was annoying enough, now there was another Hobert. He wrote, "No, after all, he is only a sequence 8. Then he wrote again. The Night Watcher Squad's distress telegram from Tingen City was too brief and did not attract enough attention from the cathedral, so the cathedral's assistance will arrive at least half an hour later." The premise of this statement was that the distress telegram was too brief, which led to the consequence of not attracting enough attention from the cathedral. This was still within the scope of 008's ability. But when Ince released the pen, the quill wrote on its own again. The first distress telegram was indeed too brief, but the second distress telegram was very detailed. Ince's gaze narrowed again. There was a second distress telegram. He looked in the direction of Blackthorn Security Company. For today, he had been cooped up in his rented room writing for a long time. He didn't know when he would have such an opportunity again. Most importantly, if this failed, the cathedral would definitely guess his purpose and might send Saint Selena's ashes back to the cathedral, in which case he would have no chance at all. Ince finally made up his mind. No matter what, he had to take a gamble today. Dunn, who had just finished sending the telegram, smiled. Let's reintroduce ourselves. Night Watchers, Dunn Smith. Hello, Captain Dunn, Hobert smiled. Let me introduce this sealed artifact I possess. It's called a teleportation statue, and its ability is. Also, my staff is a one-time magical item, and its ability is. Klein said, Hobert, with your help, we can stall the opponent for a longer time. Hobert chuckled. Also, I suggest, perhaps we can try to lure Maigao Aosi underground, preferably into Channy's Gate before engaging. Backland, Night Watcher Squad Headquarters. Dai Li had been guarding the telegraph office for many days, and today she finally couldn't hold on anymore. After asking the clerical staff in the telegraph office to wake her up immediately upon receiving a telegram from Tingen City, she collapsed into a chair and rested for a while. When the clerical staff received the first telegram, he felt that the situation didn't seem that urgent, and Dai Li was sleeping soundly, so he first submitted the telegram to Captain Thomas, planning to tell Dai Li later. But when the clerical staff received the second telegram, just the phrase, "Evil God's Descent," made him feel the urgency of the matter. He quickly woke Dai Li, and after seeing the message, Dai Li immediately went to Thomas's office. I need to see the Archbishop. Only the Archbishop had a way to provide support to Tingen City within a few minutes. Tingen City, Blackthorn Security Company. Dunn shook his head after hearing Hobert's suggestion. The child in Maigao Aosi's belly has high spirituality and probably won't comply so easily. Hobert said, I can try. Even if it doesn't succeed, there's no loss for us. Dunn considered it for a moment and nodded. Hobert breathed a sigh of relief. Although Dunn's state was off today, he hadn't lost his sanity. He returned to the security company's reception hall. At this point, Maigao Aosi already looked somewhat agitated. She scratched her head, pulled out a large handful of hair, and naturally threw it into the trash can. Leonard's expression had become a bit stiff. He secretly swore to himself that he would never casually flirt with ladies again. Hobert smiled and said, 2 days ago, we obtained something good, 2 golden antlers that grew on a bull's head. Maigao Aosi first showed a distortion smile, then said, my child says the crow-feathered golden-horned evil creature's horns are very delicious. With Hobert taking over, Leonard breathed a sigh of relief and, at Hobert's hint, went to the back of the reception hall. We put the 2 golden antlers in the basement. Just standing opposite Maigao Aosi, Hobert felt immense mental pressure. He tried his best to resist this mental pressure. If your child wants to eat, please come with me to the basement, and I'll get it for him. Thank you, kind sir. Maigao Aosi smiled and said, my child seems to have no strength today and needs some nutrition. Saying this, she got up and followed Hobert to the underground entrance of the Blackthorn Security Company. Hobert asked casually, he has no strength today. Yes, usually he's very active. Maigao Aosi said, but this morning, he said today is a very crucial day, and he would only occasionally speak a word to me. Hobert took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his forehead. What a good baby. Indeed. Maigao Aosi smiled gently. For example, now, the child tells me that there is danger underground, and you taking me underground is to kill us. Hobert froze there, feeling as if he was being gazed upon by the god of death. Is that really true, sir? Maigao Aosi asked, her tone unchanged. How could that be? Hobert laughed. This child is as humorous as his father. My Gao Aosi was like a melting wax figure, with thick liquid beginning to drip from her head. Her smile became terrifyingly distorted. Sorry, sir, I can't go down with you, so, go to hell. Although Hobert was prepared and immediately rolled forward, he still couldn't dodge in time and was scratched on the back by My Gao Aosi's suddenly lengthened fingernails, leaving a long, deep wound. Relying on his barbarian's thick skin and tough physique, he rolled down the stairs with the momentum. When he looked back, My Gao Aosi had already left the entrance of the underground passage. Hobert ignored the wound on his back, picked up his cane, and rushed up. Thump, thump, thump. He took 3 or 4 steps at a time, and suddenly he felt that his barbarian potion had digested quite a bit at this critical moment. He immediately understood that if My Gao Aosi didn't enter the Chinese gate, the evil god would descend in the reception hall ahead of time. This was the script written by 008. As long as one participated in this matter, one had to follow the script of 008. Hobert's actions just now were clearly disrupting this script, not following the script and rules of 008. Thus, Hobert's barbarian potion was digested. But now was not the time to think about these things. As soon as he returned to the first floor, he heard My Gao Aosi screaming and questioning, "I won't let you hurt my child." Dunn had already appeared in the reception hall holding the urn, blocking My Gao Aosi's exit. Klein and Leonard had also hidden in a nearby room, ready to strike at any moment. Ignoring the impact of My Gao Aosi's screams, Hobert rushed into the reception hall and plunged his cane into the ground. Order. Watching the order would grow rapidly, he laughed loudly. "You are weak, your whole family is weak." The reception hall became exceptionally quiet. The order under the tree canopy became conducive to the power of darkness, the power of theft, the power of sunlight, and became suppressive of filth and fallen power. Hobert's shout made My Gao Aosi's attention focus on him. At this moment, her entire face had melted, to reveal her bones, looking hideous and terrifying. She raised her hand and clawed at Hobert again. However, Hobert had already grabbed the teleportation statue. He wanted to move My Gao Aosi away, but he immediately found that the teleportation statue's ability couldn't move My Gao Aosi, only slow her down. No wonder the Night Watchers defined it as a Sequence 2 sealed artifact. It had limited use against high-level enemies. Since he couldn't move My Gao Aosi, Hobert quickly retreated. His purpose just now was to attract My Gao Aosi's attention and create an opportunity for Dunn. Now that his goal was achieved, and he had also played the role of a barbarian, of course he had to retreat. Once the battle began, with the teleportation statue in hand, he could just help Dunn and the others, flash. Taking this opportunity, Dunn opened Saint Selena's ashes. Inside the urn was an extreme darkness, with countless sparkling fine sands within the darkness. The reception hall suddenly darkened, stirring up countless black, cold threads that surged towards My Gao Aosi, instantly enveloping her. My Gao Aosi suddenly shouted in a hoarse voice, "You must die." The moment she opened her mouth, Hobert, as the wielder of the order would, transferred her extraordinary attack to a wall. However, the order would couldn't transfer all of My Gao Aosi's attacks. As soon as her words fell, Hobert felt a huge impact on both his physical body and spirit body, and blood flowed from the corners of his eyes and mouth. This should be the highest level opponent he had encountered since his transmigration. He wiped the corner of his eye, but this was still much better than when it was just Dunn and the others. At least Dunn wasn't injured right from the start. Klein and Leonard seized this opportunity to rush out. Leonard stretched out his hand, stealing My Gao Aosi's upcoming foul language, and Klein threw out one of the sunlight charms. The tall order wood made way for the sunlight, opening a small gap, and a ball of light fell from midair, smashing heavily onto My Gao Aosi. A strong flash of light passed, and Hobert knew My Gao Aosi hadn't been dealt with yet. He said, "Another shot." Klein hadn't understood Hobert's meaning yet when the 4 of them saw a black infant hanging between My Gao Aosi's legs. The infant was very small, looking only about 5 or 6 pounds. He was drinking something, making, gurgling, sounds, with the umbilical cord still attached. The moment they saw the infant, all four showed varying degrees of signs of losing control. Dunn, whose condition wasn't very good, was the most severely affected. Hobert quickly adjusted the order wood, making the order under the tree canopy more conducive to resisting madness and losing control. In the brief few seconds while everyone was fighting against losing control, Migao Ao-Si, whose head had been shriveled by the light ball, stretched out her shriveled hand and stroked the infant's head. "Child, oh child." Then Migao Ao-Si fell to the ground, her flesh and blood turning to dust, leaving only a pile of white bones. The infant, having absorbed all of its mother's nutrients, quickly grew to resemble a 4 or 5-year-old. His skin was gray, as if no blood flowed, and he had a ferocious appearance, fierce eyes, without any of the innocence and cuteness a child should have. This was the birth of an evil god's offspring, not the descent of an evil god. If it were the descent of an evil god, Hobert and the others would already be dead. The evil god's offspring wanted to kill everyone in front of him, because these overconfident people forced him to descend early, so he only possessed a very, very small portion of the true creator's power. He needed to perform corresponding rituals, sacrificing many living beings, to help him establish a broader connection with the true creator, and then the true creator could use him to descend into the human world. The moment he descended, there would be no living people left in Tingen City. This city would become part of his divine kingdom. Even with only a very, very small portion of the true creator's power, the evil god's offspring possessed power equivalent to a secret supplicant pathway sequence 4. At the same time, his birth filled the entire reception hall with the power of filth and fallen. Moreover, he was an evil god's offspring, a complete mythical creature, with a much higher Beander characteristic than a sequence 4, which is why Hobert and the others showed signs of losing control just by seeing him. Hobert was the first to recover. He turned his head away, not looking at the evil god's offspring, but he could still deeply feel the other party's malice without looking. How is this not quite like the description in the original work? But now is not the time to be confused, run. If it was just Migao Ao-Si, they could have stalled her for a while, but a genuine evil god's offspring is not an opponent on the same level at all. As soon as he had this thought, he suddenly found his shadow had come alive, stood up, and was trying to snatch the teleportation statue from his hand. The shadows of the other three also came alive. Dunn's shadow didn't try to snatch Saint Selena's ashes, but instead twisted its own head, making its head parallel to its shoulders. Dunn's neck was also severely injured as a result, and he could no longer support himself, leaning against the wall and falling to the ground. Leonard, while shaking off the entanglement of his shadow, raised the hand holding the blood vessel thief sub. This was the ability he had just stolen. Ha 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 ha. But just as Leonard opened his mouth, a piercing child's laughter interrupted his foul language, and all four simultaneously felt their hearts struck by a giant hammer, each spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood. Dunn used his strong willpower to continue using Saint Selena's ashes, but this time the tentacles seemed to be out of his control, not daring to approach the evil god's offspring. At the same time, Dunn's shadow's arm turned into a spike, piercing through his chest, and blood immediately spread across Dunn's chest. Then the evil god's offspring seemed to change targets, die. Leonard was like he was hit by a huge force, being knocked against the wall. However, in the nick of time, Hobert moved him to his side, but Leonard's face was already pale, and he had fainted. Completely not on the same level. This can't go on. Hobert retreated to the corner. Buy me a few seconds. Dunn used the urn to catch the blood flowing from his chest, and the tentacles, bravely, wrapped around the evil god's offspring. Klein seized this opportunity. Light. He threw out the second, sunlight charm. The evil god's offspring suddenly said, "Light, shine upon the earth." The fireball in the sky was about to fall, but the light ball flickered a few times and exploded in midair, indeed shining upon the earth. The evil god's offspring easily broke free from the tentacles' bondage. He extended a finger and pointed at Klein. Klein's shadow suddenly grew much taller and punched Klein flying. Klein looked at his chest, which had collapsed in one area, clearly with several broken ribs. The dark shadow quickly came before Klein. Just as Klein was in despair, a towering figure sitting on the Iron Throne appeared above the reception hall. Klein was stunned. It was the Creator. But he hadn't prayed for the Creator's gaze. Klein suddenly realized and looked at Hobert in the corner, who was standing with his hands crossed and head bowed, as if praying. Of course, this was just the posture Hobert had taken earlier. He himself was already in the country of disorder at this moment. Actually, Klein could also use the power of Source Castle to deal with such high-level enemies, and he had more diverse methods than Hobert, but he lacked sufficient mystical knowledge and didn't know how to leverage the power of Source Castle. Hobert, in the country of disorder, used true sight to clearly see the appearance of the evil god's offspring. His form was somewhat illusory, as if not a product of this world. After the Creator's figure appeared in the reception hall, the evil god's offspring looked back without any fear. This was the first time the Creator's divine might had no effect on a creature in the real world. Hobert first projected a huge power of order into the reception hall. The fallen and filthy aura in the reception hall immediately vanished without a trace. Then he threw chaos power at the evil god's offspring. The evil god's offspring easily dodged it and even tried to counterattack with his foul language ability, but this attack was completely useless against Hobert now. The evil god's offspring was more agile than a monkey, causing Hobert's 2 attacks to miss. Speaking of which, it was quite embarrassing for him, the Creator. Currently, he only had these 2 presentable powers, and their attack range wasn't large. Also, because each attack required Hobert to spend 1 or 2 seconds to re-aggregate power, the attack speed was not fast either. After a moment of thought, Hobert had an idea. He reached out and summoned the black eye that was kept in the stone box. Let me show you something good. He used his spirituality to activate the black eye in front of him and projected the power of the black eye towards the evil god's offspring. This was equivalent to creating a path to the knowledge more and placing this path in front of the evil god's offspring. This time, he couldn't dodge and immediately stood there motionless, a giant eye made of flames reflected in his deep black pupils. Hobert used the maximum extent of chaos power he could mobilize to envelop the evil god's offspring. Pop! The evil god's offspring exploded like a broken tomato. Hobert scanned the area with true sight and found no wraiths or anything. The evil god's offspring was completely dead. This made him sigh with emotion. As expected, Beander characteristic suppresses everything. Without the country of disorder, he would not have been able to defeat the evil god's offspring. Requesting monthly votes. The Creator disappeared, and Hobert vaguely heard, "Praise the Creator." Klein breathed a sigh of relief. The matter was finally resolved. Looking at his other teammates, Hobert was in the best condition, not severely injured. Leonard seemed to have only fainted, but Captain Dunn's situation was not optimistic. Blood kept flowing from his chest, and a pool of blood had already formed beneath him. Dunn Smith turned his head to look at Klein, a gentle and relaxed smile on his pale face. Tingen City is saved. Just as Klein was about to struggle to get up and use ritual magic to heal the captain, a pale hand suddenly pierced through his chest. Even Hobert hadn't noticed when the one-eyed Ince Zangwill appeared. Klein looked at that pale hand, gradually losing consciousness. After falling to the ground, he saw Hobert holding the stone statue, moving Captain Dunn and Saint Selena's ashes to his feet. Ince Zangwill. Klein's vision went black, and he lost all consciousness. Ince was slightly stunned. He didn't expect this sequence 8 in front of him to know him. One nuisance is dead, and there's still another nuisance. Although he failed to advance, he could still use the abilities of sequence 5 inches gatekeeper. Hobert felt like he was about to freeze. He immediately opened his spirit vision and indeed saw a very tall spirit and a spirit floating in midair beside Ince. Hobert saw Dunn's eyes losing their luster. He quickly made a choice, throwing Saint Selena's ashes to Ince. Get lost. Ince didn't hesitate. He picked up the ashes and immediately left. It wasn't that he was afraid of Hobert, but that support from the Holy Cathedral could arrive at any moment, and he didn't even have time to kill Hobert to vent his hatred. Ince Zangwill. Upon hearing this voice, Ince immediately trembled all over, as if recalling his most terrifying memory. He had still left too late. Hobert looked towards the doorway, following the voice. Standing there was an extremely clean-looking old man with deep eyes. This was the support that had rushed from Backland's St. Samuel Cathedral, Archbishop Anthony Stevenson. If Diley hadn't insisted on seeing the Archbishop, Anthony might have only just seen Tingen City's distress telegram now. Hobert saw that this old man was at least a saint. He finally breathed a sigh of relief, bowed slightly to the Archbishop, and then hurried to set up the ritual to rescue Captain Dunn. Ince stood there, no longer thinking of escaping. He knew it was impossible for him to escape from Anthony's hands. Just then, the quill pen tucked into Ince's waist suddenly jumped out and rapidly wrote on the floor. Just as Ince Zangwill's legs were turning to jelly, a passing, mad mage, was attracted by the large tree in the reception hall. 008 was even more unwilling to be caught by the Church of the Night than Ince. Its desire to escape was even higher than Ince's, and most importantly, it wouldn't be intimidated by the fear aura emanating from Anthony, so it wrote extremely fast, finishing the sentence before Anthony could react. A power of slumber and fear was released from Anthony. He prepared to first seal 008 with his ability. However, at this moment, a huge pressure suddenly appeared outside, forcing him to temporarily stop. A section of the reception hall wall had collapsed, and a white-haired, white-bearded man walked in through the gap in the wall. He looked travel-worn, as if he had been constantly on the move. He naturally knew of Anthony's presence, so he merely stood at the gap, seemingly observing, or perhaps waiting for an opportune moment. Hobert, who was setting up the ritual, was trembling violently. This was a tremor from the depths of his soul. The story, written by 008, had, as expected, come true again. This white-haired, white-bearded old man was a sequence 3 inches mad mage, of the lawyer pathway. Although the suppression of the Black Emperor pathway's Beander characteristic was not as powerful as that of the death pathway, a saint could easily crush a low sequence, and an angel could easily crush a middle sequence. This saint of the lawyer pathway merely stood there, rendering Hobert unable to do anything. In the reception hall, the terrifying aura and the maddening aura intertwined and pulled at each other. The confrontation between the two saints put Hobert's mind under immense pressure. He watched with trembling body as the mad mage glanced at the order wood out of the corner of his eye. He struggled against his body's tremor and said, If you are here for this tree, then please take it." The standoff continued, but, "Fear Bishop," Anthony put his hands behind his back, the meaning clear, "if you want to take it, take it." For him, the most crucial matter now was to seal 008 and apprehend Ince Zangwill. As for this tree, he could feel that although its Beander characteristic was not low, its power was rapidly dissipating. 9 times out of 10, it was a magical item that could only be used once, or a few times. Hobert's words gave both Sequence 3s a way to step down, neither of them wanted to engage in a fight. The mad mage, while wary of Anthony, came to the tree. The moment his hand touched the large tree, the tree immediately shrank, turning into an ordinary piece of ebony. He could feel the abundant order power within this ebony, as well as the high Beander characteristic of this power. The mad mage, who had obtained the ebony, bowed slightly to Anthony in gratitude, then turned and left. In 1 step, he was on the street outside, in 2 steps, he was at the end of the street, in 3 steps, he had vanished. Anthony gave Hobert a deep look and went to chase Ince, who had already escaped in the chaos. Hobert's spiritual body and astral body had been repeatedly squeezed and pulled today. He was extremely exhausted at this moment, and the wound on his back was still bleeding. His clothes were completely soaked with blood, and he left bloody footprints wherever he walked. But now was not the time to rest. He roused his spirits and continued to prepare the ritual. Suddenly, he seemed to sense something and quickly went to look at Dunn. Dunn's pupils had already dilated. Dunn's face bore a gentle smile, facing outwards towards the reception hall, as if he had just been gazing at Tingen City in the sunlight. Hobert finally could not bear it. Ince, quill pen, mad mage. You mother f *ckers. Just as he was about to slam his fist onto the floor, he suddenly remembered that the Black Emperor could even find loopholes in death. Hobert's eyes suddenly flared. He still had a way. He continued to set up the altar, but the symbol in the middle was changed to the symbol representing the Creator. Just as he was about to sacrifice to himself, he saw the bile of the evil god's offspring not far away. He reached out and grabbed it, enduring the whispers and fallen brought by the bile, and placed it before the altar as well. Looking once more at Dunn, who wore a gentle smile, Hobert said, "Oh, creator of human order." For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.